order a meeting of the Public Works Commission, and we'll start off with the roll call, please.
All right, going down from top to bottom as it's appearing on my screen, Commissioner Glass. Here. Commissioner Hannan.
Here.
Commissioner Bajaj.
Here.
Commissioner Garcia.
Here.
Commissioner Min.
Here.
Vice Chair Simpson.
I'm here.
And Chair Funabashi.
I'm here too. All right. Do we bring our beautiful red blue flag, and we will be prepared to salute it? There it is. We'll all rise and begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so I presume all of you got a chance to look at our pretty weighted agenda for this evening, although I realized a lot of it was all the traffic counts and the different data collected for Pacific Coast Highway. I was finding that was the bulk of it, but and having kept that in mind, I thought that the order of the agenda was pretty appropriate based on the other topics we'll be discussing, but I will certainly look for an approval of the agenda, or just maybe notation from anyone who feels a need to change it. Otherwise, we'll go with the agenda as presented. Okay, seeing no objection, then I will move on then to, do we have, I didn't notice as when I checked just about a half hour ago, there weren't any additional blue folder items. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you then. Then I'll power through our consent calendar, and then I'll circle back as we do to get the approval for that. These are business items, except those formally noticed for public hearing or discussion are assigned to the consent calendar. The commission members may request that any consent calendar items be removed, discussed, or acted upon separately. Items removed from the consent calendar will be taken up under the excluded consent calendar section below. Those items remaining on the consent calendar will be approved in one motion following oral communications. So we have obviously the documentation to affidavit of posting. Did everyone have a chance to review the minutes from our last meeting? And was there anything that needed to be corrected or amended? And I'll just look for anyone who feels there is to speak up now or to raise your hand through the participants field. Okay, seeing none then. Right. And before we jump into H1, do we have anyone who from the public to participate? Or let me, actually, I should probably circle back and just get our consent calendar approval. Let me do that. If I can get a motion just to present, to approve, I should say, the consent calendar as presented.
So move.
Okay, we have a first from Commissioner Hannan. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, from our Vice Chair Simpson. Unless there's any disapproval, or let me ask, maybe we should just do the roll call type of approval. Gene, does that seem appropriate since we're still doing the Zoom meetings?
Sure, we can move forward with that. Commissioner Glass?
Oh,
Yes.
okay, if you'll just go down our list. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Glass?
Yes.
Commissioner Hannan?
Yes.
Commissioner Min?
Yes.
Commissioner Garcia?
Yes.
Commissioner Bajaj?
Yes.
Vice Chair Simpson?
Yes.
And Chair Funabashi.
Yes, very good, thank you. So now I'll just read the part on public participation on the non-agenda items. This section is intended to provide members of the public the opportunity to comment on any subject that does not appear on this agenda for action. This section is limited to 30 minutes. Each speaker will be afforded 3 minutes to address the commission. Each speaker will be permitted to speak only once. Requests, if any, will be considered first under this section. So I'll ask the staff, do we have any written requests, or do we have anyone online other than our commission here and staff?
Yes, so we actually have Alan Kleinbaum. He has his hand raised, so I'm going to allow him to speak. And then just as a reminder, you do have 3 minutes. So as long once you start, I'll start your timer.
Okay, and we'll go with that for the item that is not on the agenda this evening.
Okay, so Alan, whenever you're ready.
I'm here. This is Alan Kleinbaum. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
We do hear you, yes.
Okay, great. Good evening. Thanks for allowing me to speak here. I live on the 200 block of South Camino Real, and that's north of Torrance Boulevard, and then just 1 block inland from Pacific Coast Highway. And I've had a problem here. I've lived here since 1986, and in recent years, Athens Services, they pick up the refuse in my neighborhood. And what they're doing now is changing. There's a hotel on Pacific Coast Highway, and there's a shopping center also on Pacific Coast Highway. And those are commercial businesses. And Athens is shuttling all the trash from those facilities most days of the week to residential areas where I live in the Seasons Complex. Sometimes they put the trash from those facilities, those businesses in front of my house, and I've complained, or they put it on my neighbor's house, and would appreciate if they could leave the commercial garbage in the commercial buildings, not in the residential areas. And so I'm meeting with on Wednesday with Mr. Seman, the Public Works Director, to go over it. But I've complained numerous times. I'm not really getting very far. And they have these scout trucks that they use, and they pick up containers from all the residential, the multifamily houses, and also from apartment buildings and from commercial areas. And they shuttle them to different parts of the city all the time. They should really try to pick up the trash locally, right? You know, where it gets generated, not shuttling it all over the city. And the person that decides that is actually the city, not Athens Services. That's the way the contract reads. But the city's kind of resisting participating in determining where that occurs. And this is turning into a big nuisance, and I'd appreciate your help if you can. And also, they don't respect the hours of picking up the trash. They're not supposed to be on the streets past 6. Yet almost every day of the week, they're scout trucks moving containers and picking up trash past 6, many times without permission. Thank you for your help.
Thank you, Mr. Kleinbaum. As a fellow resident, we always appreciate when you bring these things to the commission's attention. I will share with you that it being a non-agenda item, we are not, as a commission, able to address it this evening, only because it wasn't on our agenda this evening, in keeping with the Brown Act. But I know that this does not fall on deaf ears with our staff. I was appreciative that you shared that you have a meeting with Mr. Saman, our Public Works Director, and I think that's an appropriate direction to go. And with him being able to correspond with Athens, hopefully get this resolved for you quickly. I'm certainly aware of my own neighborhood, how they take the big bins and they truck them over with the little lead truck and put them all in a row so that the big truck can come along. So I can picture that in your neighborhood. Obviously, it may be a little different than mine, but I'm certainly mindful of that. So again, I thank you for bringing that to our attention. I do see, okay, thank you again. So do we have anyone else from the public for an item that is not on the agenda?
So everyone else, it looks like they're here for J1. I will give them the opportunity to raise their hands if they want to speak. And just for the record, we also don't have any e-comments for this item. So I don't see anyone with their hand raised, so I believe we can move on. Okay, great. Thank you so much. So we have no items to continue from the previous agenda, but we'll jump right into J on the agenda, items for discussion to our action. And we'll start off with J1, which is the 182nd Street, that section between Inglewood Avenue and the railroad tracks, suggestions from staff for traffic calming enhancements. So with that, I will pass it over to Mr. Kim for the
All righty. Good seeing everyone again. For tonight's Public Works Commission meeting, the first item, J1, is, as Chair Funabashi has mentioned, it's the traffic calming enhancements for the segment of 182nd Street located between Inglewood Avenue and the railroad tracks. As we usually do for our presentations, just going to briefly go over a bit of background. This was originally initiated by residents, namely, I believe it was 2 residents that live along this corridor segment. The request actually came in prior to COVID, and around the time that we were getting ready to start doing some assessments and evaluations is when, a lot of the lockdowns occurred because of COVID. And so we kind of waited it out to see how traffic would normalize, to see, what types of changes we might be able to anticipate with COVID now kind of letting up. And so we kind of reinitiated this about a month or so ago to try to, once we realized that, the speeds and the number of volumes have kind of slowly begin to normalize. And so we felt comfortable enough to get some of the data to get an assessment on what is going on along this particular segment of 182nd Street. If you recall, I have a photo right here of the Inglewood Avenue at 182nd Street. This is the southbound direction. As part of the Inglewood neighborhood traffic calming study that we had done, one of the recommendations that the commission and ultimately the council moved forward with was the left turn restrictions along southbound Inglewood Avenue accessing eastbound 182nd Street. The turn restrictions went in place, I believe, before COVID, and they've been in place since. The restrictions are from 7 to 9 in the morning and about 4 to 6 in the evening. As part of staff's evaluation of this area, of course, we did field observations and went out there, took a look at some of the vehicle volumes, or at least the vehicle speeds, and then we also got some speed data. So we collected some speed data that kind of helped us put together our assessment for this area. Here, I'm just going to briefly kind of go over the vicinity map. 182nd Street from Inglewood Avenue to the west, the railroad tracks to the east. Our study segment, if you will, is classified as a minor arterial roadway on the current CRS, or our California Road System classification map. The study segment runs east to west, or west to east. Mentioned previously, the westerly limit is Inglewood, easterly limit of our study area, railroad tracks. This segment, if you will, is approximately 675 feet or so. Along the segment, there is an entrance-only intersection at Fermona. I'm going to try to pull my cursor here. So this is the entrance-only. So it's southbound Fermona Avenue only access. And then on the north side, we have access way into the cemetery located to the north side of 182nd Street. Along the segment, the roadway width is about 40 feet wide from Inglewood to Fermona, and then it narrows from Fermona to the railroad track. So as you can see, we got about 40 feet starting about here, and then around this point is where we begin to see a little bit of narrowing as we go easterly from Fermona Avenue. The posted speed limit is 25 miles an hour. There's 1 lane of travel in each direction, and parallel parking is only allowed on the south side of the roadway, of course, only on this wider 40-foot portion of the roadway. As described in the South Bay Bicycle Master Plan, this segment of 182nd Street is proposed as a Class 3, so shared bicycle facility. Jumping right into some of the data and the observations that we got. So in March of 2021, so this year, I apologize. I know I said May and June. That was for the Alta Vista Park project. For this segment in March, staff went out, got some speed data along that corridor, and the posted speed limit is 25 miles an hour. But as you can see what the data findings are, especially the 85th percentile speed, we were seeing about 34 miles an hour in the 85th percentile speed. And then the other thing that I wanted to note here, and I've included as part of our table, is the 10 mile per hour pace. And basically what the 10 mile per hour pace is, which 10 mile per hour gap, if you will, are the majority of vehicles traveling in. And our data found that I think it was about 80 to 85% of vehicles were generally within this 10 mile per hour pace of 26 to 35 miles an hour. Ideally, when we look at speeds on certain locations, the speed limit and the 10 mile per hour pace is generally the speed limit, posted speed limit is within that 10 mile per hour pace is kind of like what we would like to see, because that shows kind of an even distribution of vehicles that are traveling slightly above or slightly below the posted speed limit. In this case, the majority of vehicles are going at a reasonable, if not greater than the posted speed limit that's out there. And that's kind of what our findings are showing. Average speed, we've talked about the average speed. The average speed is just to generally show what the average speed can be. It doesn't really indicate so much of a speeding concern, except for the sheer fact that we like to just kind of generally look and see if there are huge differences between the lower end of the speeds and the higher end of the speeds to get the average. And so, but the key thing to focus on here is the 85th percentile speed, and then notably the 10-mile-per-hour pace. Of course, as part of our assessment, we also did look at reported collisions along this segment and during a 2-year span. So we looked from January 1st, 2019 to, I believe, May of 2021. And there were no reported collisions along this segment. Now, that doesn't mean that there were no collisions at all. It just means that none were reported. So as part of staff's assessments, this slide is basically showing our recommendations for this area. So the first recommendation that staff has to reduce the speeds is the installation of edge lines. Excuse me. As we know, edge lines visually narrow the street by separating and kind of clearly defining an area where vehicles are traveling in the travel lane and, of course, the parking lane or the shoulder. By narrowing the roadway, it's intended to reduce speeds because it kind of creates this feeling of confinement for motorists and drivers. And we kind of lean toward this as an initial recommendation because it's relatively cost effective and less intrusive in regards to traffic calming. It seems to be a somewhat effective traffic calming technique and could aid in helping to reduce some of the traffic speeds along this corridor in this segment. Some of the additional benefits, this helps to maintain the parking that's on the roadway, but also at the same time with the edge line in place, it helps us somewhat delineate the travel lane from the parking lane and the shoulder. So sometimes an ancillary effect can be that vehicles that are parked there as motorists are entering or exiting their vehicle, they can get some added safety, if you will, or can get some potential safety added to the fact that the edge line is kind of pushing the travel lane and the vehicles further away from the shoulder. The second recommendation we have here for the radar feedback signs. This is a common tool that we've used throughout the city, the radar feedback signs. They serve as a reminder, if you will, to drivers by reminding them of their speeds and providing awareness to the drivers to really mind their speeds as they're traveling along this corridor. As part of our recommendation here, we have one placed in each direction. So we have one in the eastbound direction as you're entering the roadway, and then one in the westbound direction as you're kind of past the railroad tracks, and then you're entering the remaining segment between the railroad tracks and Inglewood Avenue. The third recommendation we have here is the use of oversized speed limit signs and pavement markings. The effect is very similar to the radar feedback signs. We want to remind drivers of what the speed limit is on the roadway by using speed limit signs that are slightly larger than standard speed limit signs that you would see on the roadway, and then have 25 pavement markings along the roadway. An additional recommendation we have here actually is to install an oversized speed limit sign and a 25 pavement marking towards Kingsdale, which is kind of east of the railroad tracks. But we thought it would serve as a benefit for motorists that are basically approaching this section of the roadway from Kingsdale. They'll see an oversized speed limit sign and a pavement marking to be reminded of what the speed limit is prior to crossing the tracks and then entering this area. And so we've kind of included that as part of our recommendation. We kind of go through what our concept or our recommendations could potentially look like. This is 182nd Street at Inglewood Avenue. This is looking east. We have an edge line that's in place there. As you can see by this white line. I tried my best to kind of visually show the narrowing of the roadway to create a vision of constriction and kind of show what the edge line, once it's in place, what we can expect visually from the edge line installation. We have here is the radar feedback sign, the oversized speed limit sign, and then the 25 pavement marking. Drivers, when they're driving, they generally focus in front onto the roadway. And so the speed limit sign will be there on the periphery to remind them, but also the radar feedback sign which is a digital sign, really stands out. And then you have the 25 pavement marking that's on the ground that'll further remind drivers that the speed limit along here is 25 miles an hour. This is just a continuation of the edge line. Then moving on, this is on 182nd Street towards the railroad tracks as we're looking west. Oversized speed limit sign, and then the 25 pavement marking. And then similarly on Kingsdale, as we're looking west, once again, oversized speed limit sign, pavement marking on the ground, and then radar feedback sign to remind drivers of what the speed is. Fiscal impacts. Roughly, these are the costs that can be expected with these enhancements. We have edgeline striping coming in at approximately $3,500. Radar feedback signs for 2 units, one in the eastbound direction, one in the westbound direction, would be $13,000. Oversized signs, and then any additional appurtenances if we need to upgrade the sign poles, if we need to replace some of the existing signs that are out in the field because they might be faded, and just kind of creating this new sign pole with these new additional signs. Approximately $200 per sign, so we can expect about $600, and then 25 pavement markings, 3 for $300, about $100 per 25 pavement marking. So the recommendation to the commission tonight is as follows: is to review the engineering report, to receive public input, and provide direction to the staff regarding proceeding with traffic control modifications for the segment of 182nd Street between Inglewood Avenue and the railroad tracks. That concludes my presentation. I'm here for any questions. I do know that we also have e-comments that were submitted. And so we can either listen to some of the residents that are currently attending or listening in on this Zoom commission meeting prior to the e-comments, or I can get into the comments first and then move forward with opening up to resident input, but I'll leave that up to the chair. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Gene. And before we do deliberate as a commission, I know we've got members of our public with us here now, so I'm going to look to staff to let our public at large address us. And then we can jump into those e-comments. We'll certainly appreciate those, hearing those at the end. And then we'll jump in it as a commission and deliberate and make our decisions from there. So we'll start with the public comments first.
Okay, so I'm going to start off with Michael Garland. And just a reminder, you have 3 minutes. So I'm going to allow you to speak right now.
Hi, I'm Mike Garland. I'm a resident of Franklin Park. I fully support all the traffic calming efforts on 182nd Street. I'd like to offer a friendly amendment to the proposal, however. The edge line, which the proposal adds to the eastbound lane, should be moved to give a 10-foot wide parking lane and a 10-foot wide eastbound travel lane. This would further enhance safety by slowing eastbound traffic and providing 2 feet of additional parking lane. 8 feet is definitely too narrow. And once again, thank you for your work on making this stretch road safer for the residents who live in this area. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Garland. And then we'll cue our next speaker.
Okay, so next up, Alan Kleinbaum.
No, I have no comment. That's okay. Thank you.
Okay. So Danny Quinto, I know you registered to speak for this item. I'll give you the opportunity to raise your hand if you're interested. And then we also have a phone number ending in, oh, okay, so Danny Quinto, you just raised your hand, so I'm going to allow you to speak right now.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for letting me speak, and thank you so much for all the work that has been done on this. I am one of the residents that Gene referenced earlier, and so we've been doing this for a few years and just so appreciate everything that we've tried. The turning signs, the PD has been out. They're amazing. And so we really have appreciated all of it. We're support everything that you have on the plan, and we thank that for that as well. But also would love to see that white line extend a little bit more to 10 feet as well. When we measured a Ford Explorer parked on the side of the road up against the curb, it's about 8 feet to the edge of the car. So it doesn't give very much room to get out of the car. We've got 10 kids ranging from 10 years old down on our street. And so even just for the safety of those kids getting in and out of the car, as well as just giving that space for cyclists. We've had a real increase in cyclists since the pandemic and pedestrians, truthfully. A lot of people going up to the brewery and such. And so if they could use the street safely rather than the sidewalk, that would also help. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you very much. And next.
Okay, so next up, it's Spencer and Jenny Trombley.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you guys so much for addressing the speed and volume concerns we have along this portion of the road. You know, it's a really critical sort of area, being so close to the two of the largest middle school and elementary schools in the district. We have a lot of pedestrian traffic. We walk our kids. You know, there's about 10 small children that we walk along the street, and we for years have been trying to get the city to look at ways to reduce both the speed and the volume on the street. So thank you for studying it, to Jean and to Christian also. I'm gonna piggyback off what my neighbors are saying. We think the 10-foot parking lane as opposed to the 8-foot would really help us get our kids and babies into the car safely when we're parked on the street there. And you know, I think, I'm not sure if the bike path is something that's going to happen in the future, or if we could add a bike path there. You know, Grant has a dedicated bike lane, and it seems to be the same, or it's a higher class, I don't know if that's the correct terminology, street. So I think that would be really good to add there. I totally agree with the radar feedback and the enhanced or bigger signs, and in general agree with everything. As a resident who lives on the street and travels it frequently, it's really just a precipice at the border of our city, but it's really important in terms of accessing the schools, and it's really, really dangerous as is. We're really afraid to walk the kids on the street. So thank you guys so much for addressing this.
Thank you. All right. Who's next?
Okay, so there is a phone number ending in 546. And if you're on your phone, you just press *9 to raise your hand. So I'll just give you a few seconds just to see if you're interested.
That's actually my phone. I can call
Okay. So, so I think that's it. I don't see anyone else for Zoom.
Okay. Then I presume that wraps up the public's desire to participate on this issue right now. So, Jean, why don't we then circle back to those comments that you have, just to elaborate a little bit more on how the public feels about this?
Sure. So we received a total of 4 comments in regards to this item. I'm going to go in order of whenever we receive them. So the first comment is from a Monique Mitchell. The comment states, I support the intent and direction of the proposed mitigations to calm traffic on 182nd Street between Inglewood Avenue and the rail tracks. However, I believe with very little more effort, this residential strip can be made even safer for the families who live there and their children. I support the idea of larger speed limit signs, which is very good, but what would really help further is adding just one more sign that reads, caution, residential driveways, children at play, in parentheses, with kids at play graphic, close parentheses. I support the painted edge line, but for safety purposes for homeowners, parked cars, and moving traffic, the width for parked cars needs to be the standard 10 feet, which will still leave a generous standard size lane for a more speed conscious stream of traffic. Thank you for working on this and for the discussion. Also, thanks for your consideration. Next comment we have is from a Danielle Quinto. The e-comment reads, as a resident on 182nd Street, I support the proposed calming enhancements. I would propose to increase that safety buffer zone indicated by the white painted strip to 10 feet rather than 8 feet. When we measured the street, 8 feet is at the very edge of a parked mid-sized SUV, so it does not protect someone getting out of a vehicle. Also, if there's more between the side of the road and the white line, more bikes would feel safe using the street rather than the sidewalk to go east on 182nd Street. There has been a marked increase in cyclists since summer of 2020, and it would further increase the safety for pedestrians and cyclists if they had space on the street to ride rather than to have to use the sidewalk. Thank you all immensely for researching the traffic on our street and possibilities to help calm it. We are forever grateful for the protection you are providing our community. The next comment is from an Akemi Pradhan. The e-comment reads, I support the proposed calming enhancements on 182nd Street. It is great ideas to have new oversized speed limit signs with radar feedback digital signs. Painted edge lines should be 10 feet instead of 8 feet so that we can have more space to open our car door without worrying about getting hit. I have kids to go school walking on 182nd Street, and I feel very anxious about their safety because some cars speed so fast. I'm very thankful that you are considering and helping us to calm this traffic. Thank you for your hard work. And then the last e-comment is from Spencer Trombley. I support the proposed calming measures to 182nd Street. My neighbors and I believe that the enlarged signs combined with the radar feedback signs and edge line striping will help reduce the speed and enhance safety on this portion of the road. We are a critical access to two of the largest RBUSD middle and elementary school campuses, and many students walk to school along this street. We must do all we can to slow the traffic and reduce the volume of cars on this street. It is very dangerous as is. This being said, and as other neighbors and homeowners have mentioned, a 10-foot parking lane would be adequate room to safely park and get our children in and out of our cars, open parentheses, opposed to current 8-foot suggestion, close parentheses. We would also like to request a dedicated bike lane be added adjacent to the parking lane. The above mentioned enhancements only cover the speed concerns on 182nd Street. There needs to be more done to address the sheer volume of cars on this 2-lane neighborhood street. Neighbors would like to blockade the eastbound lane at the rail tracks. This would protect from the volume of cut-through traffic and noise pollution in our neighborhood. As is, the eastbound lane is a freeway on-ramp and is ever increasing. When the train goes by, traffic backs up to Inglewood, and it is near impossible to get out of our driveways. A blockade like other streets in Redondo have successfully advocated for would make our streets safer, reduce cut-through traffic, and greatly enhance the quality of life of this neighborhood and adjacent cemetery. Lastly, I agree with other neighbors' suggestions of signs informing drivers, caution, children at play, and residential driveways. Adams Middle Schools hosts a plethora of sports and activities where children are walking, combined with the aforementioned school foot traffic. These signs would again alert drivers that caution needs to be made when utilizing this street. Thank you for helping to make the street safer for the children and families in our neighborhood and local students and school staff. And that ends all the e-comments that we've received.
All right. Thank you, Gene. I appreciate that. I have my screen open. Pretty much I can flip back and forth to all the commissioners. And if you're familiar with that feature to raise your hand, I would like to give obviously each of you an opportunity to ask staff additional questions and maybe make some additional comments. We'll give each commissioner obviously that wants to speak an opportunity to do so. And I'm sure we'll come up with some great ideas to then make some proposals later. So as I look around, I'm looking for my commissioner's hands up. All right, Commissioner Garcia, you're the first hand I see. You have the floor.
I think Jim beat me to it actually, but I'm gonna go real short. I was just gonna ask about the railroad. Did anybody coordinate with the railroad to update their markings while you're doing all this painting on the street? Gene?
No, no coordination. We're actually not going to be anticipating to touch. We'll be out of their right of way, which is where the limit lines or the 15 feet or whatever from the rail tracks are. So we'd be out of that area. We wouldn't be striping anything or touching anything within that area.
But they have those warning X's that they make you put in per the railroad, the PUC guidelines.
Well, if they're in our right of way, we would be installing them as part of this, if as appropriate.
Okay, yeah, I would suggest talking to the railroad, because I think your white line is going to go across the railroad markings that they put down when they update it.
They wouldn't put those down. We put those down.
Oh, you put them down? Okay. You're going to squeeze them in so they're a little more skinnier?
Yeah, I mean, we'd find a way to make that work. I can't remember what they look like in the existing condition, but if they need to be restriped, then we would do that. But if it's anywhere within the tracks themselves, and I believe it's a 15-foot offset in either direction of the tracks, we wouldn't touch anything within that area because that's a part of their right of way. But anything outside of there, we would.
It's the markings, the warning markings, like before you get to the tracks, it's like, I don't know, 25, 50 feet before the tracks or something.
Sure. So that would be, if that's in our right of way, we would take care of that.
Okay. Otherwise, I'm all for the suggestions that you have.
All right. Anything else, Commissioner Garcia? Otherwise, I do see Commissioner Hannon's now, and then Commissioner Min, and then Commissioner
All right. Yeah, you can
Simpson.
let Commissioner Hannon go now.
Okay.
All right.
Thank
Jim, you
you.
have the floor.
Thank you, Gene. There was some good suggestions in there, by the way, I felt. But I really like your work, and I really like the idea of putting a painted edge line on the street. And I also suggest, like a member of the staff did, that we reduce the width of that lane from 12 feet down to 10 feet, as noted in the staff report. I think we've seen this. We've got pretty good data on this. We know that reducing the lane width is a good way to reduce traffic speeds. And this reduction also supports the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. So I think the two go hand in hand. It also gives a buffer. I mean, if you reducing that travel lane and you have more, room for parked cars or whatever else you want to use it for, but it also gives a safe buffer zone for people getting in and out of their car with their kids. If one of the kids will playing and kicks a ball between the cars and it goes out in the street, it gives that motorist more visibility to see that child. And it also gives the motorist more visibility to be able to read the new speed limit signs going in. So I think it would work. I do think that with those reductions, I think that we should seriously consider, and when you look at the amount of cyclists and children that are riding their bikes on this street, I think we should seriously look at maybe changing that from a class 3, which is, no lane. It's just a sign that says, you may encounter a cyclist on this street, down to a class 2 lane, because I think we have enough room. And if we do that, then this gives the kids another option to get to school or just to connect with the class 1 bike lane in North Redondo Beach. Also, I've looked at the parking width. I know that was suggested 8 feet, and I think that's plenty. I mean, when you look at the average size car, it's 72 inches wide. I mean, I know there's some big monsters out there that are probably very close to 8 feet, but the fact is, if you reduce it to 7 feet, I mean, I think we still have plenty of room, and this would allow us to put a class 2 bike lane in there. And even if it dripped over into the bike lane, it still gives a safety margin and increases the visibility for sure. I think that's what I would suggest, and it seems pretty consistent with what I've heard from the neighbors too. So I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Simpson. I will hand the floor over to Commissioner Min, and then after that, Commissioner Simpson, and I'll circle back again.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Couple questions. So on your report, you're showing an 85th percentile of, I just had it up. Where did it go? 34 miles per hour, I think it was. And so given this is not a local street, you're classing it as a minor arterial, does that mean the speed limit is supposed to go up to like 30 or 35 miles per hour?
If we do another ENT survey, more than likely the speed limit will go up, yes.
Okay. Well, therein lies like the opposite issue that we're trying to deal with. We're trying to slow down speed, right? And so if we're doing speed surveys showing a higher speed, we're almost like required to change that speed, right? So one of the ways we could try to lower speed is to do everything that you're doing, right? You're putting edge lines and speed feedbacks to try to get people to naturally slow down, so the 85th percentile in theory should go down. One of the things that I travel this all the time. I live, like, my kids go to Washington, you know, and I literally drive by the intersection 2 or 3 times a day. I go down 181st several times a week. And one of the things that always bothers me about 182nd Inglewood is on the 182nd direction, there's always a lot of, like, the east-west direction. There's always a lot of congestion coming, you know, eastbound from Washington, and then going, you know, westbound from, you know, the city of Torrance. There's always just a lot of left turn, you know, issues. There's always backups and stuff. So it feels like there might be an opportunity here to kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone. If you were to phase that signal differently so that the eastbound direction had its own left-right phasing, you could probably get rid of your right turn pocket there and reclaim, like, you know, 10 feet or 9 feet, however much that is. You would, and as Commissioner Hannon said, you might actually be able to fit bike lanes in there both ways. I kind of do the math. You had 10-foot lanes and 8-foot, you know, parking, and you could probably fit another 5.5 foot bike lanes in each direction. I mean, it'll barely fit. It'll be kind of really tight, but it could fit. And then if you were to phase the signal at 180 Inglewood so that eastbound traffic going left and right or through has its own phase, and you could eliminate a whole bunch of queuing and backup on, you know, Inglewood. So it seems like might be a very good first step at addressing some of these issues, but I think we should look a little deeper into a next step, which I know would cost more money, right? Phasing signals and redoing the loops and all that is going to cost, you know, tens of thousands more, but that could be a way to really enhance this corridor and make things safer. So I just like to throw that out there as a suggestion.
That's certainly something we can look at. I think a 3 years ago or so, we did look at some alternatives there, and obviously the volumes probably were different then than they are now. So I am saying that it is definitely something that we can look at. But just as a heads up, there was a previous analysis. I think we may have done the split phase before and try to look at it. And the issue was that there's just way too many volumes on Inglewood to where the additional phase for either the eastbound or the westbound direction was slowing down the Inglewood corridor too much. But it's certainly something that we can bring back up and look into.
Yeah, I think it'd be worth it. I mean, I'd like to, like, I'd be very interested in seeing the kind of delay you would see on Inglewood as a result of that. I mean, you would see more of a delay for sure on Inglewood Boulevard, but maybe it's inconsequential. Maybe during certain hours of the day, peak hours, you restrict turn movements or something like that to try to deal with that delay. So it just seems like an alternative we should at least explore deeper as a potential, you know, upgraded phase to this project. Not that I agree with everything in this report, so I'm not saying not to do this, but it seems like we could, with a little bit more money, we could do a little bit more and maybe really maximize the potential for this, right? Particular project. And that's it. That's all I've got. Thanks.
Okay, I will thank you. I'll hand the floor to Vice Chair Simpson and then Commissioner Bajaj after him.
Yeah, very, very quickly. The parking stripe lane, you suggested at 8 feet, and most of the residents were suggesting 10. And I'm curious to know why you went with 8 instead of 10. And then the second question I have kind of spins off. You're talking about the radar signs. There's some other streets where, in fact, as traffic calming measures, we did say we're going to put those in. And to my knowledge, this is specifically Ford Avenue, they've yet to have been installed. Does that mean there's a delay in getting the radar feedback signs? Are you saving sort of to get them all together, or what?
So the answer to the first question, the 8 foot and the 12 foot, is generally for an arterial is kind of the default, because on a local roadway to go 10-foot travel lane, it generally depends. I know that we do have some roadways that are considered arterials that we may reduce to 10-foot lanes. It was just kind of a go-to. We're more than open to kind of modify and address and create, an 11 and a 9 or a 10 and a 10. And so that's not really, that wouldn't be too big of a concern in regards to the edge line striping. We can definitely do it. It's just the way that we had initially thought it up. It typically is the 8-foot parking lane is kind of our default. So we just did the 12 and the 8. As for these radar feedback signs, it's a twofold response. We did wait to accumulate a few to purchase them. There was a delay that was associated with them. We do have them at our shop now. I'm in the process of scheduling with our guys because we have several locations that we need to install. And so we're trying to schedule within their work schedule and my work schedule to kind of get a plan together to start deploying them.
Thank you.
Okay, then thank you, Commissioner Vice Chair Simpson. I'll hand the floor over to Commissioner Bajaj.
Hi there. Thank you for the report, Gene, and to your colleagues. I think I think you did a good job pulling out the few tools that we do have in our industry for residential traffic calming. I like the edge line idea, the enhanced speed limit signs, and then the speed feedback signs. That's like icing on the cake. So I think well done. I think you're pulling out kind of all the stops that are within reach, and even striving a little bit further with the funding for those signs. And just a quick question: I know a lot of residents were asking for the 10-foot lane. Are there? If you can remind me what the street classification here is, and there's not a lot of buses, right, that are bus lines using 182nd. That maybe in those situations where we would be a little bit more lenient towards 12-foot lanes.
I don't. Well, we did look up buses. I can't remember what we had thought of. I don't recall there being a significant number of buses that travel through this area.
I can't think of anything east of the railroad tracks. Sorry, west of the railroad tracks. They all seem to kind of go up Kingsdale.
Right.
Okay. And then, just wanted to, what's the street classification there?
It's classified as a minor arterial.
Okay, great.
Yeah, because it connects Inglewood and Kingsdale, and then ultimately Hawthorne, which are major arterials.
That was all I had. Thanks.
All right, thank you. I think it was really quite apparent, some of the comments from our neighbors, obviously suggesting that we consider increasing. And so it sounds like the question I had was answered, in that we are not, by the designation of the road, constrained with having to have it 10 or 12 feet wide. My thought was not necessarily public transportation, but we do see what we affectionately call the Bobcat, the trailer that has the one trailer and, maybe just two axles on the back. I certainly see a number of those coming in and out of the back way down Inglewood. They kind of come into the industrial or the shopping centers there off of Hawthorne. So I had a bit of a concern there, but unless there's some reason why we can, as a commission, I would like us to consider reduce the actual eastbound travel lane to increase that parking. Maybe through further deliberation, we'll determine if we really want to paint it as a bike lane per se, but I think we might all agree that if we make if that one white stripe that's going to eastbound lane is further away from the curb, that by very nature of smaller cars or the narrower vehicle parking, it's going to lease from that driver's side of the car to where that white line is. It almost kind of visually invites cyclists to stay safely within that area, creates a little bit of a visual buffer with the paint. And as was mentioned from some of the residents, obviously gives the departing passenger in a car a little more room. I was reminded of when my mom would actually make us get out on the opposite side of the curb. We were never allowed to get out of the car on the driver's side when we were parked in traffic, but I'm still mindful of obviously having that buffer. So with that, I'll deliberate a little further to a motion to either take completely the suggestions made by staff or any other modifications that might be appropriate. So with that, I'll open it back up to the floor.
If I can add just real quick.
Okay.
Because it seems like the commission's direction may be to create the 10-foot travel lane and the 10-foot parking lane. If we do so, one of the things that I think that we should do is at least hatch the parking lane so that we can appropriately delineate that it's not 2 lanes of travel, but that it's a single lane of travel and there's a hatch lane there. Because if there are no vehicles parked there, we'd hate for a situation where a driver thinks that it's an additional lane on the right and it's a 2-lane roadway. And so we'd ultimately have to hatch. And so on the fiscal impact side for the edgeline striping, there'd be a nominal modification to the price.
Thank you, Jen. I appreciate you clarifying that. Now that you've presented, that makes perfect sense. Exactly. So yes, perfect. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'll move the item with the hash marks.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor from Commissioner Garcia, like staff's recommendation, but with a modifcation to a 10-foot parking lane and a 10-foot driving lane with those double hash marks. Does that sound right? And all the other?
That's right.
Hold on, but Chair, does staff need to take that and evaluate, or does the motion need to say that staff should explore, the modification of the edge line to a 10-foot without binding staff to that decision now?
Your point is taken. Let me ask Gene about that now. What are your thoughts, Gene?
Yes, that would be the appropriate, because worst case scenario, we would go in with the 12 and the 8, but if we have an opportunity to make it a 10 and a 10, then we would move forward with that alternative.
So it almost seems like we should, go with staff's recommendation with an option that if after your further evaluation able to be done, that you would move ahead and we wouldn't have to revisit it again at this level. Yes? Okay. So Commissioner Garcia, does that make sense for your motion?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Whether it's 8 or 10 feet. Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. Because I think at least we're moving in the right. Yeah. If it can be 10 feet, certainly we would, obviously staff could move forward on that right away, but at least they could start with the other enhancements. I'm also saying, did I see correctly hands go up from Commissioner Hannon and Commissioner Min for additional comments or input before I even entertain a second?
And Commissioner Glass.
Yes.
And Chairperson Funabashi,
okay.
I raise my hand for you as well.
Okay, and forgive me, I don't have an order of which came first. So if I may, I'll just start with Commissioner and I'll continue across the board. Commissioner Glass, you have the floor, but you'll need to unmute.
Yes, I'm there. Okay. I'd like to second that motion. I like the way it's been modified to give the option to increase the width. A Ford Explorer right now is 78 inches wide, and so 8 feet is giving inches if you're going to be a driver getting out of that car. But 10 feet is maybe too much. So I think it's good to give Gene and the staff the option on where the marking would be. Other than that, I agree with what I've heard today. And I'm willing to second Commissioner Garcia's motion.
Okay. So then we do action, and it has been seconded, but obviously before I call the vote, we have time for further discussion. So with that, then I will hand it to the floor to Commissioner.
I'm sorry, Ed, who did you call? You broke up for a second.
Oh, the floor is with Commissioner Hannon.
Thanks.
Jim, can you? Okay.
Yeah, however, I'm anxious to hear what Ted has to say. He's has a lot of wisdom there. But anyway, I do think it's difficult. We're trying to get accommodate everybody: walkers, runners, obviously motorists, and a cyclist, on a 40-foot wide lane. So it's difficult, but I think 40, 10 feet travel lanes, 10 feet, from the edge of the curb out would be acceptable. It's not truly a class 2 bike lane because we need 4 or 5 feet between the lines to make it that way. But there's another thing that concerns me a little bit, and that's the door zone. When you have something like this, people have a tendency to maybe not park right next to the curb. They'll give themselves a little buffer away from it, and then all of a sudden you have a cyclist that tries to fit between the edge line and the car. And if somebody happens to open the door, that puts the cyclist in the door zone, which represents about 20% of all bicycling collisions happen because of a door zone. So there is a little bit of risk to the cyclist when it comes to this. So I just want to point that out to you, but I do think it's going to get people, cyclists and e-bikes, off of the sidewalk and on the street. So it's going to accomplish a lot of good things too. So I wish we had more room, right? Anyway, thank you.
Right. Thank you, Commissioner. I'll give the floor now to Commissioner Min and then to.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to, I support the motion, but I'd like to make an amendment to have Gene and the staff evaluate future potential for bike lanes or signal phasing at Inglewood and 182nd for a future phase. Or maybe even in the short term, install sharrows on here to kind of handle Commissioner Hannon's door zone issue potentially. So all I would like to amend is the further evaluation of bike lanes or bike facilities and modified phasing at 182nd and Inglewood. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Min. And I've just made a note of those, as I'm sure all of us have heard that. We did obviously add one option, if you will, after staff will need to study further the width requirements like we were talking about. But if I may hand it over to Director Saman, let's hear from him first, and then I'll come back to Commissioner Garcia and see if we can make that friendly amendment. So I will hand it to you, Director Saman.
Thank you, Chairperson and Commissioners. It's good to see you all again. I would just ask that instead of continuing to make reference to a 10-foot parking lane, because really it's not a 10-foot parking lane, the parking zone is 8 feet away from the curb. That is the standard. That's even how we build our parking tees. I would ask that the motion maker and maybe the seconder of the motion is to request that the travel lane, the eastbound travel lane, be reduced to 10 feet and the residual be shared or modified per the edge line. Because if that gives us the full 10 feet, so be it. If it gives us 9 feet, 9.5 feet, we know we can secure the 10 foot for the travel lane and the balance of it will be the edge line. It will have to be an edge line. As Gene mentioned, it would need to be also crosshatched so that we make sure that that's identified as a parking, if you will, non-driving area. And like Commissioner Hannon is saying, that door zone becomes quite concerning when a bicyclist is riding that close to a parked vehicle. So I guess my primary ask here is to not refer to this as a 10-foot parking lane, but to reference that the Commission's motion is to construct or to stripe the eastbound lane to be a 10-foot travel lane and put the edge line at that point crosshatched as Gene had recommended. And for Commissioner Minnie's request, I would ask that we explore and model the signal operations out there. And if it's something that could be accommodated with the split phasing of the east and westbound direction, that will be good. I recall, like Gene mentioned, that the north-south movement had suffered tremendously previously when we looked at that. And as a matter of fact, we've already put in restrictions for left turn restrictions on north and southbound Inglewood at that intersection. So in the motion, if it gets added into the motion, I would ask that we explore that. And if it's something that is not a significant degradation, then we can come back and report that to the Commission to pursue the implementation. Otherwise, it would die at that particular point. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I guess just to clarify, right, the evaluation would be exclusive of moving forward with the enhancements along the 182nd corridor, meaning that no matter what the outcome is for the signal evaluation, we're still taking to City Council moving forward with the first portion of this, which is all the radar feedback signs, the edge lines, and everything else. Because I'd hate for the evaluation to bog down the other enhancements while we're trying to look for solutions there. Okay.
Absolutely, and I think that's why we're trying to word or craft this this motion so that it allows you to move forward with everything that's been presented by staff to this point with those options if it can be improved, whether it be the width of the lane or reduction of the lane and width of the parking, to also include that future study, but that neither one of them would prevent staff from moving forward going to mayor and council. So I think we're all hopefully mindful of that. I do still see a couple of hands raised. So if you are not wanting to speak, but your hand is still raised, if you'll lower that just so I can tell. And then I'm going to circle back to Commissioner Garcia for your interpretation. Obviously, no interpretation. What Director Saman has suggested in terms of the wording of your motion, does that seem acceptable?
Yeah, I actually meant to say a 10-foot lane and the parking residual. That's fine with me. So yeah, he just articulated it better.
Okay, very good. And then do we need that second affirmed from Commissioner Glass?
It's affirmed.
Okay, good enough then. As I look around, I don't see any other hands raised. So I'll vote, and I'll ask staff to call each of our commissioners by name for their response.
The roll call vote is as follows. Commissioner Glass.
Go for it.
Commissioner Hannon.
Approve.
Commissioner Garcia.
Yes.
Commissioner Min.
Yes.
Commissioner Bajaj.
Yes.
Vice Chair Simpson.
Yes.
And Chair Funabashi.
Yes. All right, very good. Seeing now that that has passed unanimously, we'll obviously keep an eye on that for when it does go up to mayor and council and additional information on in the future. So then we'll move on now to item J2, Alta Vista Park Access roadway modifications. And I will hand it back to Mr. Kim for the staff presentation.
Alrighty. So my second presentation tonight is the Alta Vista Park Access roadway modifications. There we go. A little bit of background before we move forward. This was initiated by the Recs and Parks Commission, our city's very own Recs and Parks Commission. They have voiced some other concerns that have been brought up during their meetings based on some potential speeding, and of course, with a lot of the pedestrians along the access roadway that provides access onto Alta Vista Park, potential conflicts with pedestrians that cross that parking lot area with the vehicles as they travel northbound and southbound. Alta Vista Park is located at Southside Camino Real and Prospect and Redondo Beach. It's a large park. I believe it's about 19 acres or so. And there's it's a combination of city and school district related parcels. There's multiple amenities, if you will, that are at the park. We have we have Little League field. We have I believe there's tennis courts, racquetball courts, and things of that nature. There's also a community center that includes a community room that serves multiple different purposes, like a multi-purpose-ish community room, kitchen, restrooms, and an office space. As part of staff's evaluation, we, of course, once again, conducted field observations and did some data collection. We visited the site at least a couple times for the sake of this assessment. Other times we visited the site as well to look at just general pedestrian activity, just get a general feel for the types of speeds that may be occurring along the roadway, the type of conflicts that may be occurring along the roadway. And of course, we got some speed data collection. What we have here is kind of an aerial view. This is the subject access road. Excuse me. Alta Vista Elementary School is on the south side. Actually, that would be the east side over here. Serpentine, Julia Avenue, access road, and then there's two parking lots that are actually associated as part of Alta Vista. There's this parking lot here that provides access to the baseball field, and then towards the back with the community center here and the tennis courts, there's another parking area to the north side of the access road. The Alta Vista Park access road is actually classified as a local roadway. The current California roadway system classification map, as mentioned previously, it does run north to south. The southern limit is Serpentine Street at Julia Avenue, which is here. As you can see, the southerly intersection is a T intersection. It's always stop controlled and it's marked with yellow continental crosswalks on all the legs. The entire segment of the access road is approximately 750 feet, with the northern terminus at this cul-de-sac-ish area and entrance to the northern parking lot. There's angled parking that's available on both sides of the roadway, and the posted speed limit is 15 miles per hour when children are present. The Alta Vista Elementary School grounds, that's on the east side of the segment, extends approximately 100 or so feet north from the intersection of the southern terminus intersection of Serpentine at Julia. Sidewalks are available on both sides of the roadway. And then in this midsection portion area of this access road segment, there's a stamped crosswalk that's currently located there. So moving forward with some of the speed data that we found, we took two separate counts for speed data, one in May, one in June. In late May, early June. We had to take two separate speed limits because during the times that we were kind of out there, we were trying to find the good time when there'd be a lot of access, a lot of vehicles that were visiting this park, as well as being able to identify some of the conflicts. So we spent a good amount of time on those 2 days, as well as a few other days, spot visits, if you will, to get a general idea of what type of conditions exist along this access roadway. As mentioned previously, the posted speed limit is 15 miles per hour when children are present. Our data found that the average speed was about 18 miles an hour, 85th percentile speed showing about 22 miles an hour, and the highest speed that we recorded on those 2 days was 29 miles per hour. Our SWITR's research, of course, dating back to early 2019 to available 2021, which was, I think, again, for this section was also May of 2021, also showed no reported collisions along the segment, along the 2 to 2.5 year span. So staff's recommendation for this particular segment is as follows, is to install speed cushions approximately 100 feet, 110 feet or so north of the southern intersection of Serpentine and Julia Avenue. And then the stamped crosswalk area, staff's understanding that at one point that was a speed table that allowed pedestrians to cross east-west on the sidewalks. And I'm not exactly sure. I wasn't able to collect any historical information as to what happened, but that stamped crosswalk was there, but the speed table had since been removed. And so staff's recommendation is actually stated as install speed table in my presentation. However, it's to actually reconstruct the speed table back in place. So what are some of these enhancements that we're proposing? Well, before we move to the construction side of the speed cushions and the speed tables, one of the recommendations that staff is recommending, and this is not really based on anything construction based, but more study and speed limit based, and it's to try and establish a 15 mile per hour speed limit. Now, the California Vehicle Code, the CVC, and the California Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices does allow the state or the local authority to determine a 15 mile per hour speed limit on a roadway within a public park. And so specifically per CVC 22538.3, going to bore you a little bit by reading it, but whenever a local authority determines upon the basis of an engineering and traffic survey that the prima facie speed limit of 25 miles per hour in a business or residence district or in a public park on any street having a roadway not exceeding 25 feet in width, other than a state highway, is more than is reasonable or safe, the local authority may, by ordinance or resolution, determine and declare a prima facie speed limit of 20 or 15 miles per hour, whichever is found more appropriate and is reasonable and safe. So the declared prima facie speed limit shall be effective when appropriate signs giving notice thereof are erected upon the street. So per this code, staff's recommendation would be to initially by a 15 mile per hour speed limit on this access roadway. Of course, as the CVC states, the city council would have to authorize a resolution for the 15 mile per hour speed limit along this segment. One of the questions that gets brought up is, well, the roadway width not exceeding 25 feet. Well, the CVC also defines the roadway as the travel width. And what we've been able to identify is that the actual travel width, excluding the parking spaces that's available, is less than 25 feet in width. And so we're actually able to appropriately administer and move forward with the engineering and traffic survey to potentially reduce the speed limit along this area. Kind of a terrible drawing. I tried to get the angle right and it just wasn't working out very well, but installation of speed cushions. We've talked about speed cushions numerous times, but just to quickly recap, they're typically used throughout our city to address speed related concerns. They're generally constructed of rubberized material. I try to show the wheel gaps for our public safety, fire engine type vehicles that would be able to utilize the wheel gaps to traverse through the speed cushions and not have to go over the speed cushions, possibly to make sure that they're not quote unquote wasting time, if you will, as they're trying to slow down and travel over these speed cushions. The one thing to keep in mind with staff's recommendation here, and you can see it here, is that with the installation of the speed cushions, we wouldn't be installing them in the parking lanes, which means that there is a possibility when there are vehicles that are not, when those parking spaces are available, then there may be some vehicles that end up driving around the speed cushions and not through the speed cushions. However, under slightly heavier occupancy, if vehicles are parked within those angled parking spaces, then the drivers would have no choice but to go through the speed cushions. Then here we have the reconstruction of the speed table. So a speed table, I know that we've talked about potentially installing a speed table before at certain locations throughout the city. The speed tables are basically ramped pedestrian crossing areas that span the entire width from curb to curb of a particular roadway. They're typically placed mid-block where pedestrians generally kind of cross. And we identified with the stamped crosswalks in this pedestrian crossing area that it would be the ideal location to basically reconstruct the speed table. The crosswalks, of course, are ramped and they're elevated. So they allow the pedestrians to cross at grade with the sidewalk while also acting as a traffic calming measure, because with the ramp, it allows vehicles to try to slow down and reduce their speed to help with reduction in potential speeding as they're crossing and traversing this area. The use of the speed table at this location would definitely the use of a speed table would definitely assist in addressing some of the pedestrian crossing safety concerns and also help with the speed reduction at this area. One thing of note, or two things of note, I should say. So with the speed table being constructed, one of the concerns we'd have to look into during our design phase is just appropriate drainage based on general flow, water flow through this area. We'd have to make sure that the design incorporates that the speed tables wouldn't necessarily hamper the flow of water as it's going through this area. The second thing is, in its existing condition, there are no ADA curb ramps. And so the ADA curb ramps would be constructed and have to be considered as part of the construction and the build. Hence, with those types of consideration to accommodate the drainage and the ADA concerns, the construction of the speed table, the costs can be considered definitely more significant than installing a speed cushion. But it's inherent with the device that we're providing. Fiscal impacts. Engineering and traffic survey to see the feasibility of 15-mile-per-hour signs and pavement markings, approximately $1,500. And then the design and construction of the speed table and the speed cushion is anticipated to be approximately $45,000. So the recommendation to the commission is as follows: is to review the engineering report, to receive public input and provide direction to staff regarding proceeding with traffic control modifications to the Alta Vista Park access road. That concludes my presentation, and I'm here for any questions. Thank you.
All right, Gene, thank you very much. Very good presentation. I think many of us are familiar with the park and that crazy little road. Let me look across here to see whose hands are raised for questions. Before I do, though, let me ask of staff, do we have any public waiting in the wings for any comments or to address us?
We do not have any Zoom attendees, and we don't have any e-comments either for this item.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Excuse me, I do see Commissioner Garcia's hand. Oh no, wait. I think we'll just go across. Let's see. Hands. All right. Commissioner Bajaj.
Yeah, just
and then Commissioner
question on the costs associated. And this is just maybe my own curiosity, but is there like a special fund for improvements for parks and recreation services, or does that come out of like a capital improvement fund or some other general fund?
This would come out of the traffic calming fund.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Garcia.
Yeah, I just had a question about the in the area of the speed cushions. What's going to happen to the people that back up onto the speed cushions? Is that going to lose parking spaces there or not?
No, they'll just be in the roadway, and so parking loss is not anticipated with the installation of the speed cushions.
Because the streets that I go down, yeah, typically it's like parallel parking, and if you got cars, like motioning in and out of the traffic, that won't create a hazard.
No, it wouldn't be any different than if you had like those parking bumps or things like that. Like when you're at the shopping center, it wouldn't be any different than that.
Okay, that's all.
In regards to parking loss.
Okay, I'm just scanning through here. And I take it from one of the pictures. Actually, I see Commissioner Hannon's up, so I'll hand the floor over to you, Jim.
Oh, thank you. I had I'm not necessarily a speed cushion fan, but I think in this application, it seems like it does make sense. And I think that with the number of children and, people down there and having fun and playing, I definitely think maximum speed limit would be no more than 15 miles an hour. But I did have some concerns about the emergency vehicles. I mean, the people playing tennis, racquetball, sports, and things like that do have emergencies occasionally, and every second counts. And I just want to make sure that you're comfortable with, that the speed wouldn't hamper the emergency vehicle's ability to get there without any interruption. Is that a true statement, Gene? You okay with that?
Yeah, I mean, typically in my discussions with fire and PD, they're generally, even with the speed cushions, I know the wheel gaps are there, but I've also heard that they just kind of drive over them regardless of the wheel gaps being there. Sometimes they use the wheel gaps, sometimes they don't. We can certainly circle back with them to make sure that they're absolutely okay with it. But I don't foresee significant issues with the speed table or things of that nature at this location.
Okay, just one more quickie. I like that speed table that has the crosswalk built in, you know, the combination. It just seems like it would give the pedestrian another level of safety because, you know, if the car sees the hump, they're going to slow down anyway. Is that your finding also? I mean, do you think that's consistent with what your findings might show? That there is another level of safety with incorporating a crosswalk on a speed bump?
I mean, it's intended for its intended purpose. Yes. Now, will it be absolutely safe? That's what we're striving for, right? I typically don't like into questions of that nature only because I can never guarantee safety. But the intent is to create something that can potentially enhance safety, which is kind of what we're striving for here. Is with the speed table being in place, it would have drivers reduce their speeds as they're approaching and departing, or approaching the speed table, and at the same time it's bringing the pedestrians kind of elevated up a little bit higher. And so especially for younger pedestrians like students or younger children or whatnot that are walking with parents or family or whatnot, it does make them more visible and therefore provides more awareness to the driver.
Okay, thank you, Gene. I appreciate that.
Okay. And obviously part of the presentation wasn't that there was a speed table there at one time, and yet it was for some reason removed. But it is still across now, right, Gene? So we're not losing a couple of parking spaces as a result of the installation of a new or redesigned table?
Correct. This portion of the existing stamped crosswalk area is actually red curved pretty much a long length of the segment. Yeah.
Okay. And then the other question, if you go back in some of the pictures, do you not see yellow 15-mile-an-hour speed limit signs in some of the photos you took?
Correct. So those are when children are present. So because it's adjacent to the school, and that's so when children are
yes.
Yeah, playground when children are present. But what we're trying to implement here is a more permanent 15 mile per hour, whether children are present or not. We're trying to set the prima facie speed because it's adjacent to the park as 15 miles an hour.
I see. And that makes sense. Like, yeah. So it's only when children are present, and we want to obviously make that 15 all across the board all the time. Okay. All right. That's very clear to me now as well. Okay. Do we have any other questions or comments from the commission? I see Commissioner Glass's hand is up. You have the floor.
Yeah, it is. And I've got some questions. First of all, the speed table, we have no history on why it was once there and then removed. Is that the case? I understand.
Or at least in the research that I try to conduct, I wouldn't find anything.
Okay. On top of the speed table, you're going to put in, I assume, a yellow crosswalk. Considering that that may not be visible to drivers approaching because it's elevated, would you consider painting the approaches on either side of the table, yellow, for example, to highlight the fact that there's a crosswalk there?
No, well, we can't mix yellow and white to begin with in the crosswalk.
Okay.
It can't be a mixture of a yellow and a white.
No, just highlight in some way the approach so that people know that it's there, and because they can't see the crosswalk, which is flat and elevated to some extent.
Correct. I believe we may consider exploring, and I can't remember if they're already out there and existing, but we may consider, ped crossing signs and advanced ped crossing signs to let drivers know that it's a ped crossing area where the speed table is located.
Okay, which because it's a parking lot, people may not be able to see those signs because they would be off to the side by the sidewalk.
The pedestrians are coming.
Signs, yeah.
Correct.
The parked cars would obscure them.
Well, like I said, there's a significant amount of red curb, and I believe the red curb may have been placed there to enhance the sight visibility of the pedestrians as they're approaching the speed table.
Okay, I'm just looking for ways to make sure that the sidewalk, the crossing there on top of the table is protected.
Not so much protected, but we can see what we can do in kind of bringing up a little bit more awareness. Like I said, signage would be one of the ways that we can do it to let drivers know that peds are crossing at that location.
Okay. Then another question, where the parking pavement meets the sidewalk, the existing sidewalk, is there an actual curb there, or is it one of those situations where the pavement sort of rolls into the sidewalk?
They're full curb faces on both sides.
Okay, so do we need any ADA ramps or something besides at the speed table, as long as we're getting, into that, in the parking area? Along the way.
Yeah, so the ADA ramps would be included as part of the speed table construction.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. I'm not seeing any additional hands up right now. And
sorry to interrupt. We just received an e-comment. So if you would like me to read that, I can read that if you would like.
yes, please then do. Yes.
So this e-comment is from Mara Lang, and it reads, also, there's discussion about a community garden in the southwest corner of the park on the small spot of land tucked up against the hill. I just wanted to make the commission aware of that. Not sure if these improvements would affect that area. That's the e-comments.
Okay. Well, anything that certainly is appreciated just to know that. I don't know that. That's why I think I had some concerns about would we be losing any additional parking or the access and all, but good to know. Good to know. Thank you.
Chairperson Funabashi.
Yes, Director Saman.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a couple of words of input on it. I'm aware of what Ms. Lang is talking about as far as the potential community garden location, and the improvements that Gene has been proposing to the commission are distant from that, would have no impact on that potential installation or circulation in and out of that parking area.
Okay, very good. Thank you for shedding as well. Okay, Commission, do we have enough information from staff to formulate a motion now? I think obviously there's been some great suggestions. The only other thing that came to mind with me was, I thought with the table certainly being elevated, I know obviously as a fellow driver, it just seemed when you see the elevated table, you need to. And yet I noticed from the photo, it's not like the striping comes down to the slope part that you see, but I think the suggestion might be that we put ped crossing painted on the actual road itself. That might be one additional thing that could be added that would make it stand out and make it so overly obvious that that is in fact, a prescribed pedestrian crossing for this. So maybe one other thing that we could certainly add to that elevated table. So, Commissioner Hannon, is your hand still up, or did you have another comment or question? You're actually muted right now.
Thank you.
You have the floor.
I thought we were ready to make a motion, so I was going to make that motion whenever you're ready.
Okay. You know what? And seeing no other hands up, I think we are ready for that motion. You have the floor.
Okay. I'd like to make a motion that we accept staff's recommendation, and that would include the new 15-mile-an-hour speed limit and the painted speed tables. And hopefully it's consistent with your input, Craig. And then also would be used as a crosswalk combination, and we also need to address ADA requirements.
The only thing I would add before I seek that second would be I just want to make sure that we all have the understanding that it isn't moving forward with the 15-mile-an-hour signs, but rather a engineering and traffic survey that has to precede that before, but then would lead to that. Does that make sense? That's the clarification of what I think they're proposing.
Okay, assuming that would pass then?
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
Sure.
All right. Now we're looking for a second.
I would second.
Okay, I see Vice Chair Simpson has seconded that. Although I did see Commissioner Glass, your hand go up. Did you, were you trying to get in on maybe the second, or did you have a final question or concern? We can still deliberate or comment before we take the vote. And you're on mute right now. Okay, I think.
Yeah, I was going to try the second. Go ahead.
Okay, all right. Then I will ask Jean then to take the roll call vote.
All right, roll call vote is as follows. Commissioner Glass,
I'm in favor, yes.
Commissioner Hannan,
You're muted.
Sorry, yes.
Commissioner Garcia,
Yes.
Commissioner Min,
Yes.
Commissioner Bajaj,
Yes.
Vice Chair Simpson,
Yes.
and Chair Funabashi.
Yes. Very good, gentlemen. Obviously, once again, we've come to a unanimous decision, and that's always good. Okay, I think here's the big bopper tonight. Item J3 on our agenda, which is Caltrans PCH Arterial Improvements Project and impacts to on-street parking. I believe Mr. Wingy has this presentation. I'll hand it over to staff now.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, everyone. Nice to see you again on the last public evening meeting in June, what's been a very busy month for a few of us. So happy to see this night come for a number of reasons. If you'll permit me to share my screen, I think I will just proceed with a presentation that way. Hopefully you can all see that title slide there for this topic. As was mentioned, this is a project that staff is interested in making you aware of, number one, and number two, getting your input before we go to the City Council for their comments about a final recommendation to Caltrans, who's actually doing the project. Caltrans is pursuing a pavement rehabilitation project, from what I understand, all the way through LA County, as far as Route 1 Pacific Coast Highway goes through LA County. We're interested in the portion within our city limits, and Caltrans has communicated to us their first draft of a design just maybe a month or so ago. So we are considering what they presented and the impacts it will have on the parking in our area. This is the scope of this project is a pavement rehab. So we're not looking at widening. We're not looking at efforts that would require us to do CEQA studies. This is simply essentially replacement line and grade of the pavements out there. There will be some ADA curb ramp improvements. There'll be some concrete cross gutter work, repairs to curbs and that kind of thing that go part and parcel with pavement rehab projects. A couple of years ago, Caltrans approached the South Bay cities and said, we know you have some Measure R projects along PCH that you're studying, applying for funding, et cetera. And they would be willing to do the design work for those Measure R projects. And then the funding for construction of those projects would come through Measure R for Metro. Initially, that money was destined for the cities to go to Caltrans with their own set of plans, have to get a permit, and then come back and construct the project. This was a way to kind of short circuit that permitting process by having Caltrans engineers design the project itself and then direct the money from Measure R rather than through the city, but go directly to Caltrans in an agreement that Metro and Caltrans were making. So that seemed like a good shortcut for everybody. So all the South Bay cities presented recommended improvements along the corridor, and Caltrans told us that they would incorporate those things as long as they fell within the scope of what they were trying to do out there. So that's kind of the nexus of these two ideas, this Caltrans project and the Measure R funding of certain improvements. One of the city's Measure R projects was a PCH arterial study. I forgot the L there in arterial, sorry about that. We did that a couple of years ago. I think we may have presented it to this body a couple of years ago. that project consisted of 3 phases. The first phase was a corridor study from the city's northern boundary with PCH at Anita south to Palos Verdes Boulevard. And there were a number of recommendations made, or they called them mitigation measures in the study for improvements, operational improvements along the corridor. Of the 29 intersections that were reviewed, the consultant came up with mitigation measures at 19 of those intersections. And we passed along those recommended improvements to Caltrans to include everything that they could into their capital maintenance project, this CAPM project that's going to start next year. So that's some of the background in history on this. Some of the mitigation measures, if you didn't get to go all the way through the report, which I apologize for the extensive nature of that, but I just wanted to have it available for you in your staff report. A number of recommendations included turn restrictions or turn lane extensions along the cross streets as you made your way along PCH within the city. None of those items will be performed by Caltrans in this project. Those are all separate things that the city will undertake at different times. There were a number of turn restrictions from PCH to other smaller streets. Practically speaking, the improvements there would be the installation of signs, fairly minor things. We didn't want to try and do all of the public outreach necessary to consider all those things before Caltrans came through. So we will pursue those to the degree we need to with various public outreach in the future. Mitigation measure for cross gutter reconstruction was also on those lists. That will be addressed by Caltrans. And then these two in red on this list are improvements at Torrance Boulevard and then improvements at kind of the 3 intersections between Avenue I and Palos Verdes Boulevard, including the T intersection of Vista Del Mar. So those are the items that were recommended in the PCH arterial study that we have proposed to Caltrans. These last 3 with the asterisk, and the 2 red ones are the ones we're going to talk about tonight, which have impacts on parking. Okay. So the first one, just give you a couple of bullet points here. The intersection at Torrance Boulevard, 3 primary recommendations there. One was to add a southbound right turn lane. That's at the 76 station. It's right there. The city is pursuing that. There are some right-of-way acquisition issues we need to take care of. We are about 75% of our way through design on that. So this is not a project that we're asking Caltrans to take care of in the CAPM project. We're pursuing that separately. There was a recommendation to extend the northbound left turn lane, which required reduction of parking on the west side of the street, which is in the coastal zone. That's a longer process. Trying to eliminate parking from the coastal zone requires a trip to the Coastal Commission to discuss that. So there was no way we could get that done within the time frame that Caltrans has to get this project built. So this final one is the extension of the southbound left turn lane, which is something we have been thinking about for a long time. It was one of the PCH arterial improvements. We were planning to do it with the southbound right turn lane project at the same time. When we ran into some right-of-way hiccups on that one, we tossed this one over to Caltrans, hoping that it would get done first. Much needed to those of us who travel that way, at least in our humble opinion. So what that would do, the value of it is it reduces delay and improves the operation of that intersection, but it does require some loss of parking. And perhaps that parking could be made up on the next block north. And so I'll go through a visual on that with you right here. This is a Google Maps aerial shot of the area. North is to the left here in this drawing. Pacific Coast Highway is the primary road running left and right on your screen. And then Torrance Boulevard is over here on the right side of the page. And this is Garnett Street here. And what the project would propose to do would be to extend the southbound left turn lane from its current 125 feet up to 340 feet. Graphically, this is about the distance. It's about half the block there. So that would be a great improvement, again, for those of us who make that commute every day. Some of the reasoning for it are found in this table here. These are just some highlights from the PCH arterial study. Current delay time in the AM over a minute, reduced to 40 seconds. That's, I said 15.3, should be 25.3, almost 40% reduction in the delay there. That's very significant. Midday gets a very good 24% reduction. And then surprisingly, the PM peak was just a nominal reduction of a few tenths of a second. But still justifying the consideration of this operational improvement. Okay, so what does it cost? Well, here's what it costs. 7 parking spaces. There are grouped, 5 groups here. There's a driveway into the business where my cursor is, and then there's 2 more just to the south of it. So those would have to be removed to realign the lane lines, and when you bring the tapers in and such to get back to the regular marking, you just don't have any room to put those back on this block. So these businesses would, I'm sure that's primary users of these spaces are probably these businesses here. I know each of these has dedicated parking within their property lines for their customer base. The shopping center here has a lower below ground parking lot, as does this office building. And then the Redondo Pier Inn has a surface level parking spot. This last business here is a realty office on the corner, and it's got a fairly big parking spot. Never seen that one very heavily occupied. And then what we would also ask Caltrans to consider is the replacement parking on this block. There's ample room for most, if not all, of the 7 spaces there. Currently, it's signed no parking, or maybe no stopping even. But it does appear there's room, and we would have to talk to Caltrans about what operational issues they would see with returning parking, some or all parking on that block, if it was desired to try and replace these 5 spaces. So that's the first intersection. I can pause here if there's questions about this, or I can continue to the other intersection. How would you like me to proceed?
I'm scanning real quick, and I'm seeing commissioners doing the quick roll. So I would say, keep rolling.
Keep moving. Okay. Very good. Okay, the second intersection is, like I said, a conglomeration of intersections between Avenue I and Palos Verdes Boulevard. The mitigation measures in the PCH arterial study included signalizing Avenue I. That's not really in the purview of the CAP-M project, so we're setting that one down for now. But these other 4 bullet points would be, they are extending northbound left turn lane from Avenue I to Palos Verdes Boulevard, extending the southbound left turn lane from Palos Verdes Boulevard to Avenue I, essentially back-to-back left turn lanes. Prohibit the eastbound travel from Vista Del Mar onto Pacific Coast Highway. That would be a closure for the outbound direction. And then adding a southbound right turn lane at the Rock and Brews there at Palos Verdes Boulevard. So those are the 4 recommendations we had made to Caltrans in our earlier studies of what we'd like to see out there. Again, I'll do an aerial walkthrough here with you. Over here on the right, kind of this diagonal, is Palos Verdes Boulevard. Palos Verdes Pacific Coast Highway runs essentially left and right on your screen. North is to the left again in this picture. Here is Vista Del Mar. It's not labeled, but here is Avenue I, where my cursor is now. And this is Elena. Of course, there's a light at that intersection right here. I think you're probably mostly familiar with this area. I've also kind of penciled in, with the limited tools I have at my disposal, a kind of a maroon colored line here that's actually the city boundary, which is important. Not so much for whether or not Caltrans will do it, but understanding where the limits of our jurisdiction are as a body. So the proposed project would add these dual left turn lanes, back-to-back left turn lanes, not dual, I shouldn't say it that way, back-to-back left turn lanes, southbound onto Palos Verdes Boulevard, and then northbound onto Avenue I. As you know, right now, those are fairly short lanes with a concrete median between them, and the thought would be to remove the median and just put those lanes, remove the concrete median and put those lanes back to back. A second component would be to prohibit the outbound movement with some kind of a bulb out, similar to what you saw in Fremona at 182nd Street in the earlier presentation tonight, permitting southbound motorists on PCH to turn into Vista Del Mar, but not to leave Vista Del Mar and get on the highway. Most of you are probably aware that there's often a lot of congestion at this intersection as people try and go from Vista Del Mar into the left turn lane to get onto Palos Verdes Boulevard heading eastbound. And that's difficult at most hours of the day. We have also asked Caltrans about widening this area right in front of the Rock and Bruce. There's actually quite a bit of right-of-way there that is within Caltrans right-of-way already. They were not aware of that, at least the design team was not aware of that, so they didn't add this particular right turn lane in, but we think it would be necessary if we ask them to do the dual lefts. Torrance has indicated that they're not interested in the dual left, the back-to-back lefts, if this right turn is not available, because currently we have effectively a right turn lane that you can squeeze through there to turn right on Palos Verdes Boulevard and head up into PV when the light is red. If we were to put in these back-to-back lefts, we wouldn't be able to do that any longer. So Torrance is kind of conditional on this whole thing. Okay, so there's also two other components to this project. They don't affect the parking conversation, but just to make you aware, Torrance is planning to put in an extended left turn lane in the northbound direction here. And then when this property on the corner here is the old Palos Verdes Boulevard, Palos Verdes Inn, now Legato in redevelopment, made a dedication to the city of about 110 feet of about 10 feet wide piece of property for as a mitigation measure for their traffic condition. And so Caltrans is moving forward with incorporating that into their project as well. So that's just on background, doesn't affect the parking. What does affect the parking are these yellow colored improvements I've shown you. And before we get to the parking, sorry, we'll just touch base on the benefits here. AM peak, a reduction of 10% in delay, midday 16, and the PM peak, a whopping 40% again. So huge improvement there in operational efficiency if these improvements are installed. Okay, better does come at a cost, as I mentioned. This red line here represents about 460 linear feet of parking, equivalent to 21 spaces or so. There are a couple of gaps for driveways here, but I've subtracted that from the total length. So 460 is kind of the net loss there of parking. We don't really have any place nearby on PCH to replace this parking. I will point out that each of these parcels on which these businesses are located are include a back dedicated deeded parking area. So each of these businesses does have a deeded property with it, a second portion of their parcel bifurcated by this Riviera Village Way that includes parking space for the businesses. So an argument could be made that those businesses can handle their parking with their deeded spaces. At least at one point in their development, somebody did the math and that worked out. Whether or not that's still the case remains to be seen. So that's the bad news. The operational improvements are huge at this intersection if these improvements are made, but it does come at a cost of the on-street parking. All right, so the recommendation tonight is really just for the commission to receive and file this report, but staff is very interested in public input and certainly your input that we incorporate into our staff report that we move forward towards the city council or any recommendations for staff to pursue prior to going to the city council to consider this. I will say that Caltrans has had this for about 4 years. In May, they said, here's the plan, and it's done. And we said, wait a second, it's not done. You haven't done everything that we wanted you to. And you've eliminated parking, and we have a lot of things to talk about in the city before you decide it's done. So they're putting a lot of pressure on us to move this forward. We've kind of penciled in July 20th for a council meeting date. That's just, it's not the next meeting, but it's the following meeting. And so we would certainly like to get whatever input we can in that short time to be able to get a response to Caltrans, whether maybe we abandon all these improvements to preserve the parking, or maybe we pursue them despite the loss of parking, seeing maybe a bigger good for more motorists, if not those using those parking spaces. Okay, I will turn off my screen unless you'd like me to keep it available for particular questions. I can always come back to it. I can also open up Google Street View or Google Maps or whatever, if that helps as well.
Okay, Andy, thank you so much for that presentation. I think to the commission, and it was really quite clear. Obviously, Pacific Coast Highway is our major thoroughfare through our city, and I like the fact that we're taking kind of bite-sized pieces tonight by just focusing on Torrance and the southern end at PV Boulevard. Obviously, when I started reading into the administrative reports and all the documents that were gathered for even up at the north end, obviously we'll look at where Anita and Catalina and Redondo and all that works out too. But I'm probably going to give obviously an opportunity to comment and or ask questions. And I saw Commissioner Hannon's hand go up first. So you have the floor.
Dan was up first, but
We're kind of competing for first here.
It seems like it.
Go ahead. I went first last time.
Okay. I did take the time to look through all 500 pages of this document, by the way, and I actually thought it was very interesting. Shows you the boring life I have, I guess. But anyway, I did think that Caltrans did a sincere job of trying to keep the traffic moving at a flow that, of moderate speed. And I do think that these changes will discourage motorists from leaving PCH and traveling through quiet neighborhoods, which is my, a big concern. I understand too, looking at the loss of parking, potential loss of parking certainly is a difficult trade-off. But then again, I do think it's important to keep traffic moving on PCH and out of the neighborhoods. So. Also, something that I noticed several months ago that Caltrans came in and painted the double yellow line in the center, yellow, and then they also added real bright reflectors and in February, March, I could not believe the difference. It was so clear. And I do think that was a huge safety improvement, and I'm hoping this will be the same configuration throughout the city. Also, I like you pointed out, Andy, I noticed that the outbound closure on PCH and PV, and I guess one of my notes was, I wonder how Torrance feels about this, but I think you answered that, and it sounds like you coordinated with them. So the other thing is that I simply really liked the city staff's recommendation noted on page 45 through 48, and that was, of course, covering Torrance Boulevard and then also Palos Verdes, and I like the way that you enlarged that turn lane for cars traveling southbound on PCH at Torrance Boulevard. They wanted to make a left because I live in that area and I see it all the time. It's just not having enough room to move your car over to make that left just stops all the traffic. And, again, I think it behooves us to keep it flowing. I think, staff made some really good observations in Appendix F and the related attachments on the noted intersections in the report. I really think it was great that you guys took this opportunity and you're really leveraging it. And I think all the changes I saw were really good. I just had one general question, and did this study include pedestrians and bicycle safety in any of these related changes at any of the 29 intersections in Redondo Beach? I mean, I didn't. It really concerns me. I've got to tell you. I mean, we've had some serious pedestrian fatals, and certainly in South Redondo, and I don't know. I just can't. I feel like there's more than we could do, especially at the intersection. So, maybe you have some ideas on this. Maybe we are able to open this door. But if we are, I'd certainly recommend that staff open that door and see what we can do to help pedestrians and bicyclists. That's all I have, Andy, and I think you did a great job on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hannon. I found it so interesting that of the consulting firm's statistics and all, that it included not only the car counts, but the pedestrian counts and the bike counts. And even though the study was something like 4 years old, right, back in 2017. And so I was like, oh my gosh, 4 years ago, the whole world has changed in 4 years.
And it was all on a Thursday, by the
interesting
way.
That yeah, right. But it just seemed like the pedestrian counts were really low, which just shows you that cars rule the day. So anyway, let me, if I may, I'll hand the floor over to Commissioner Garcia.
Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Hannon's. It is a problem with the southbound PCH at Torrance, but the one I'm concerned about is when you're doing the westbound PCH at I Street, when you're making that left. I know the cars, they don't stop. Is there a keep clear square there? Because if there is, I never see it. Cars just like roll right over it and from the other side, and then. I know it's a tough place to make a left, but like most of the traffic that I see, makes a left there, and so it backs up into PV Boulevard. Basically it's part of the congestion there. But that needs to take a closer look at. But having no parking on that north side of PCH there, the red curbs, I think is a good idea because those cars come flying down there, like at least 30 or 40 miles an hour, and it's hard to park there, and it's a dangerous place to park. And so, I would say, let them find another safer place to park. But that's all I have.
Thank you, Dan. Who else has their hand up? Let's see. I see Vice Chair Simpson's
Just
hand
very
up.
quickly, the report I thought made very good sense, and I would heartily endorse it. And I thought that area where you lost the parking places, as was just noted, is not a very good place to be parking. And I think as you mentioned, most of those businesses do have their own parking spaces available behind them. So I think the report makes perfect sense, and would hope we urge that you carry on with it.
Thank you, John. Anything else? All right, thank you. Yeah, I think it was all pretty clear to those of us who obviously get around town. If you're driving southbound on PCH coming up on Torrance Boulevard and you need to go through and you're not making that left, you need to get over in that number 2 lane, because that number 1 lane is backed up, practically to the real estate office, and obviously trying to southbound PCH to PV Boulevard, it'd be great to get Torrance to agree to the right turn, because even though there is space, if there's not a right turn lane, I can't tell you how many drivers tick off other drivers by not being far enough over the left for a car to squeeze in, right? And then you got cars trying to come in off of Vista Del Mar, so I did have a question. I'll circle back. Let me hand the floor over to Commissioner.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. All right, just very quickly, I just wanted to give Andrew and Ted the permission to give Caltrans hell about this stuff, because they give us hell about all kinds of other stuff. So about community engagement and all kinds of things. So they obviously haven't done their job here in doing the appropriate community engagement with yourselves and people who operate along this corridor. So I would stand my ground and make them, understand from that they have to do this. And so that's all I got to say. Thanks.
It's part of why it's been a long month for us. We've had a couple of long meetings with them. So.
Well, I appreciate all the hard work, obviously. Andy, I do have a question in terms of the various jurisdictions, and how, obviously Caltrans is the superseding factor and who decides really what goes on Pacific Coast Highway. But you said something interesting, and that is that we had to get some kind of buy-in from Torrance for that right turn lane dedicated for southbound PCH to PV Boulevard right there in front of Rock and Brews. But that Torrance wants to put an extended left turn lane for northbound PCH to head up the hill on PV Boulevard, which makes perfect sense to me. I'm not disputing it. That left turn pocket is too small anyway. But there's the other issue too about how the people feel about the trees in the center of the lane, and all some of the response there. I think if I heard you right, you said that Torrance was leading the effort there. And so I'm just curious for my own edification. I thought that the center of the road, that's the north half, if you will, of PCH. Isn't that the Redondo Beach side, that left turn pocket? So shouldn't that really be our call?
That's the intuition that will guide you astray in this case, because the boundary line is actually right at about the curb line on the northbound direction. So almost all of that south of the intersection there, almost all of the roadway in the northbound direction is in the city of Torrance.
I gotcha. And when we learned that Rock and Brews was on the Torrance side, it just visually doesn't seem that way at all. But we realized how you drew that line and it curves that way. And I'd heard that years ago, and I went, well, that's kind of interesting. And it probably made sense when there were no roads and no buildings there, and then they started developing things. But anyway, I find that. Yeah.
We had approached the PCH arterial study. We asked them to consider that intersection, even though a good part of it is in Torrance, because it does affect traffic in our city, of course. And had Caltrans not come through, we would have pursued that through a Measure R project, funding for Measure R. We'd need permission from Torrance to do it. They probably would not object if we were willing to take the lead and pay for it. So I think they're supportive of it. The only occasion where they wouldn't be supportive of it is the drawing that we saw from Caltrans not long ago included loss of all parking, a very narrow, I think an 11-foot curb lane in the northbound direction, a really wide number 1 lane, then a 10-foot left turn lane, and then another 10-foot left turn lane going the other direction, and then 2 11-foot lanes going southbound, and no room for cars to sneak by, which just turns into everybody turning right at Vista Del Mar to go through that neighborhood, who's headed up the hill. So they weren't interested in that. If we can't make room to do a dedicated right turn lane there in the southbound direction, they would prefer not to see loss of that. They've got about an 18-foot lane out there now. They're number 2 lane. So cars waiting at the light up against the lane line leaves room for people to sneak by, and that's kind of working for them. So they don't want to lose that, even that. But they're in agreement with us. They're very much interested in getting all of these operational things done. Just to give you a little bit of the sob story, we sent all that to Caltrans, and Caltrans has all that in their right-of-way already. They didn't realize it. Their design people didn't realize it, and so they just categorically said, we can't do that. That's right-of-way take. That's a CEQA analysis. Can't do that at the maintenance level that this project is set at. But then we told them, well, they figured out in February they did own it, but they were far enough down their design track that they didn't change course. And so that's when we kind of put our foot down and said, you have to consider this. And we're still not sure they're going to do it. We're fighting them pretty hard. They make us reinvent the argument every time we meet with them about why we should do this. So Ted's done a lot more battles with Caltrans in his years than I have. He's just looking at me like, now you know. So we're working on it. We're pushing hard. We're meeting with all the people there that there are to meet with. They've had some change in personnel, which has been part of the problem, I think. So, but I agree with Commissioner Min that turnabout's fair play here, and we've been at their mercy for a number of projects for years and years and years to get permits, and it would be worth them, giving us the time to do this right. So we're trying to help them with design. We're trying to hurry all this through. Part of this meeting tonight is to get, some public input. Well, certainly we haven't probably done enough canvassing. We'll talk to the council member from that district, certainly each of those districts, if it's both. I think it's just all in one district, but we'll make sure he's aware of it and get his feedback as well for any additional outreach we can do before the council.
Well, absolutely. And I think, thanks again. We thank you as a commission. And I'm appreciative too of our fellow commissioners who are obviously in this business and traffic elsewhere outside of our city and, but are certainly familiar with the challenges that you have. And with that, I would say certainly a report we can give as a commission, even individually as residents of Redondo Beach, if there's a county traffic meeting or the Public Works, commission, however they're doing their public outreach, if we're made aware of it and can support efforts that really benefit what'll really benefit Redondo Beach and, dare I say, Torrance as well, that whatever support we can get, and even if it's just coming up to show and support that, when you're looking at the lesser of two evils, giving up parking in order to improve the greater flow of people, it's come to light that obviously so many people travel PCH and don't even live and or work or even stopping in Redondo Beach. They're just getting from El Segundo up to the hill or vice versa. So the faster we can move them through, the better it is for all of us. So that's my 2 cents. And so, okay, well, I believe now is the time to entertain the moment just to receive and file our report. So I will seek that motion from one of you now. I see Jim's hand.
I think
a question for.
Yeah, Pudovin came move it before I did. So
did you have a question, Commissioner Bajan?
Yes, ultimately, then, just to clarify, please, who will make that determination? Is it the council that makes the determination for the loss of parking for this project, or is it Redondo Beach, staff, or is it council?
I think you're a little muffled.
You were breaking up. I didn't hear most of your question.
Commissioner Bajaj, I think I understood what you're asking, and you're wondering who's going to make the final decision on the.
That's what I heard. That's what I heard as well.
Of that parking. Yeah, I think it's going to, from our perspective, it's the city council that's got the ultimate call on that. And what Andy is bringing forward to you is not only the discussion, but identification of the elimination of that parking or potential elimination of that parking. Just wanted to vet that through you as a commission before we bring this forward to the council.
Very good, very good. And I think it helps to clarify and understand parking is on the west side of PCH, and all of a sudden now we're in the coastal zone, because I know there's obviously serious implications there, hurdles obviously that need to be addressed as well. Okay, I'm coming back to Commissioner Hannon. Was your hand up? I see it up.
Only to make a motion to receive and file it, but I was also going to ask if we could nudge Caltrans into doing a little bit more for bicyclist and pedestrian safety at intersections. I don't know if that's within our realm, but it's not just all about moving cars. There's humans out there too. So anyway, I'd like to make a motion.
Commissioner Hannon, I'd like to add a comment to that. We've had a lot of conversations with Caltrans about the PCH corridor, especially as it relates to bicycle facilities, if you will. The roadway, as you're aware, is very limited, and it's geometrics, right? Basically, we just don't have enough real estate out there. And on several projects, that became a very serious limiting factor on their approval of the project. And the most recent one was the Torrance northbound PCH at Torrance Boulevard for that right turn lane. The way that we got around that is to say, that in the city of Redondo Beach, we basically have two proposed alternatives that parallel the corridor. That would be both Catalina as well as Esplanade. And that was the only way that we could satisfy them. I think, if the real estate, if the right of way ever becomes available, PCH would be a wonderful place to consider. Unfortunately, as I know it today, there's just not enough space for it. It really will wind up being a significant loss of any other improvements in the future. And we do have that parallel. I mean, essentially, it starts with the connectivity at PV Boulevard. The connectivity there is that Class 2 bike facilities have been installed south of PCH or west of PCH in the way that Caltrans looks at it. And it makes the connection to Catalina. Catalina is the way that you can parallel from there all the way up to the other end of PCH as well.
Thank you, Ted. I appreciate your comment. I wasn't advocating necessarily to put bicyclists on PCH. However, there are a few daredevils that are out there, but I'm more of, intersections crossing PCH, how do we do that? Like on Nob Hill, some of the other intersections that we do have some challenges. And I think if the more Caltrans is sensitive to these people that are in fact trying to cross their highway, I think maybe we'll get some traffic calming measures or safety measures, but thank you. So still like to make a motion to receive and file this, and good job to everybody. Thank you.
Okay, do I see a second out there?
Just a question. Do we merely want to receive and file, or should we offer some sort of affirmative recommendation? That we are receiving and file and endorse the staff report to relay it to City Council. I don't know if that's useful or not.
Andy?
Well, I'm trying to separate my personal feelings, because I drive that way all the time, from what's best for the city. And the math comes up that we have so many people traveling on the highway who will benefit from these operational improvements versus the number of people that may have to walk an extra block for, drive around the corner to park. I think a robust endorsement of the improvements at the expense of parking would be very helpful to include in my staff report for the City Council.
So
there's our answer then. So yeah.
So the first motion hasn't had a second yet. Can I then make a motion that we endorse the staff's recommendations for improvements as suggested, even though it may mean the loss of some parking in some places?
I think if we're in agreement as a commission, I see Commissioner Hannon's hand go up. I'm thinking perhaps maybe he might consider a friendly amendment to add that to his motion, allowing you to then second it if you're in agreement. How does that sound?
You took the words out of my mouth, Greg. Thank you. Good suggestion, John. Thank you.
So with that, we have Commissioner Hannon's modified amendment to receive and file the report as presented, but with an endorsement from the Public Works Commission on those points that our Redondo Beach staff have made. The emphasis in the staff presentation, where we would favor improved traffic flow with the loss of potential parking. How does that sound, John, Commissioner Simpson or Vice Chair Simpson, for a second?
That sounds exactly like what I was trying to suggest, and I think you agreed with, and you phrased it better than I did. So.
I'm glad we're okay. So we have a first and a second. I will ask staff to call the roll call vote, please.
Chairperson Funabashi, before you do that, maybe
yes,
if there's any public input on this item before you take a vote on it.
Oh.
That is very appropriate. I'll ask you, do we have anyone from the public who wishes to speak on this?
We do not have any public comment for this item. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm glad that we did that. All right.
So then I will ask then for the vote.
Roll call vote is as follows. Commissioner Glass,
Aye.
Commissioner Hannon,
Aye.
Commissioner Garcia,
Yes.
Commissioner Min,
Yes.
Commissioner Bajaj,
Yes.
Vice Chair Simpson,
Yes.
and Chair Funabashi.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much. Here's we are unanimous again. The last item we have on our agenda this evening, item J, is the prioritization of strategies for deferred maintenance street inventory. And I will hand it back again to Mr. Wingy.
Thank you again, and this is the closing act of our night. Hopefully it's interesting. Let me share my screen and try and make it a little more interesting. Okay, here's the cover slide. Hopefully you can see it. I'll see that. So pavement management, we've talked about this at times before. We do something every 3 years called a pavement management study. That's an obligation we have to stay eligible for certain funding. What we do in that 3-year cycle is we actually go out and physically inspect the pavement on every street in the city, residential, collector, arterial. There's pretty sophisticated electronic equipment that can detect cracking and other things that indicate a condition, and that all boils down into something that we now call a pavement condition index, which is assigned to each block based on measurements taken as the vehicle doing the measuring drives by. So that's kind of the quick and dirty of what pavement management study does in the field, the data collection. That turns into an assessment of the condition of the streets, and then we start talking about how to prioritize addressing those streets. So in 2017, we came to the council with kind of a pivot point for the way we handled our residential rehab streets. The previous cycle had taken 17 years to get all the way through the city's residential street inventory for resurfacing. Somewhere in that time, we quit doing slurry seals, and we were just doing residential resurfacing kind of on a geographic basis. And so while it was predictable, next year is my district, it wasn't necessarily addressing the streets in the most efficient way that we could. So in 2017, we had a long meeting with the council, and they opted for an approach that began to be a little bit more strategic about how we address streets. And it included bringing back our citywide slurry seal program, which in a cost per square foot basis is much cheaper than about anything else we can do. And as long as the streets are in fairly good shape, goes a long way to extending their life and allowing our dollars to cover more blacktop, if you will. They made a decision at that time to commit to a funding strategy that would allow the city's average PCI for all the streets to raise from 70 to 75 over a 10-year period. And then since that time, we've done a number of projects, just about 50 lane miles worth of projects, and did an updated 2020 report that's available on the website. I think it was linked to your staff report. One of the things that came up in this the 2017 presentation is we had programs to address the residential resurfacing, which is a grind and overlay process. We reintroduced the slurry seal, which you can think of as more like paint. It's not really paint, but it's a thin application of asphaltic material that seals the pavement and keeps it from wearing as quickly. We had an arterial roadway project where we were addressing our arterial streets pavement fairly systematically. Several funding sources are available for arterials that are not available for the residential streets. So we had kind of those three programs going addressing our streets, but we didn't really have a way to address what we called our deferred maintenance streets. And we'll get into, there's a couple of slides that will help you understand deferred maintenance in a second. It takes a little bit to get your head around it in some ways. But essentially the commitment in 2017 was to invest $46 million over 10 years to get our PCIs moved upward. About $4.6 million a year. It's not the same number every year, but that's the average over a 10-year period. We've done actually a little bit better than that, but we had projected to lose some money available to this last year when we did the budget, thinking that COVID was going to impact this. And so we reduced our projections of what we could put into street programs. This year's budget cycle just completed. We were actually able to restore kind of what we thought we'd do. So we're as good as we had planned to be a few years ago. But we identified these streets known as deferred maintenance. So deferred maintenance, if you're a homeowner, you know what deferred maintenance is. It's all those things that you need to get done that you just haven't gotten done yet, either because you don't have time or you can't afford to get them done right now. Streets, it's a little bit the same way. Currently, we have a deferred maintenance inventory that's valued at about $16 million. In other words, if we wanted to write a check and go get it all fixed this year, we would have to spend $16 million to do it. The streets are in various PCIs. These are streets that we won't address in one of these other programs that I've talked about, the arterial program, residential rehab, or slurry program. Currently, there's none of them with a very poor rating, PCI below 25. But if you carry that forward 10 years and you continue to only input $4.6 million a year into the program, that $16 million backlog balloons to $28.5 million. And we get more than 130 street segments now at the PCI below 25. So it's something we wanted to address separately from some of these other programs so that we could kind of take care of, because the other programs are based on moving geographically in some ways through the city, kind of having parity between each of the council districts, also doing what needed to, trying to do the easy streets first because you get the most mileage out of your money when you do that. But this is a different animal. We want to approach this a little bit differently. So this year, for the first year, we have a $1.5 million appropriation in this new program to address deferred maintenance. When I say this year, I mean the coming fiscal year. Just quick stats here on some of our inventory in the city. This table is from the 2020 PMS report. You may have come across it. Sections, this nomenclature here, think of blocks, the block of Garnet between PCH and whatever the next street over there, Francisca is. Some of the wider streets will get, one direction will be one section and the opposite direction will be the other section. So it's not entirely always blocks, but it's something like that. Anyway, about 1,600 of those segments, 152 centerline miles, and then about 300 lane miles split among our arterials. Residential streets is the base of it. And then we've got a small category here of collectors, which, because it's a small category, we don't really have a strong program there either. We've kind of wrapped that into residential streets in the past. But current average PCI is 72. Let me just talk a little bit about this nomenclature still. PCI index from 0 or 1 to 100. Streets that are above 70 are considered to be in very good condition. Their pavement rating between 50 and 70 we call good. There's a couple of categories based on why they're only good and not very good. There's an area, a class we call poor between 25 and 50, and then very poor is 0 to 25. So these condition categories show up on another slide. So I just wanted to show you this also. This is a degradation curve of pavement. It's a generic curve that's true for just about every asphalt pavement, where you see degradation at the x-axis here is time or percent of pavement life, and then the vertical axis is PCI, pavement condition. When you start with a good pavement condition, you get a fairly slow degradation until you hit some kind of point over here at maybe 60% of pavement life, and then it starts to deteriorate quickly. So the goal is to spend your money up here where the curve is flat, because you can do it with slurry seal at $6 a square yard, or if you have to do a grind and overlay 2 inches or so, it's $25 a square yard. When you get into the thicker overlays or reconstruction, which means tearing out everything out and going down to the base material, you're up closer to $100 a square yard, 20-fold over what you can do up here. So this is what changed the minds of the council to begin to address the better streets first and not trying to attack the worst streets first, because if you can keep the good streets good, then you can stay up in this area and your money goes a long way. Okay, so back to the city, the 2020 PMS report had 3 budget scenarios that it studied and looked at. The S1, the scenario 1, is what we're doing now, which is our goal to increase the general PCI to 75. 10-year budget was 46.2 million. We get to 75 in 2030, and then we have this deferred maintenance number hanging out there of 28.5 million. The second scenario is a scenario that looks at what is the optimal way to address the streets, every street, when it needs it. If money were not an issue, when could you do it? And so it, in this case, in our case, in most cases, it front loads because most streets have a big deferred maintenance inventory. And so it front loads money. It would take us $50.9 million over that 10-year period to get the streets. They would actually be 9 points higher than our current projection, but we'd have no deferred maintenance. This is really the bond scenario. This is when if we were to borrow money, for instance, $50 million or $51 million and go do it all next year and then pay it back over time, this is kind of what it would take to be able to do that. The third scenario is also one of these what-if scenarios where we say, what if we touched every street in 10 years and got them all up into the very good category? It would take $65 million. We'd get to an 85, but again, no deferred maintenance in 2030. And by the way, the comparative number here is the scenario we're on is this 46.2 plus the 28.5 to get an apples-to-apples comparison of costs. So that puts us up closer to $75 million under the scenario we're on. So that's kind of what we did because that's what we could afford to do. And then we have this looming number out here that we've only just begun to address with this new program this year. The scenario 1 kind of year-to-year scorecard is this next table down here. It shows the budget number in millions of dollars that we're kind of programming at this point. The deferred maintenance number is low, but it climbs, as you see, up to 28.5 at the end. And the treated PCI 75 stays pretty good through this whole time period, which is good, but it just means we are still treating the streets that are easy to treat initially. So we're getting our average up, even though we have a number of streets that we're not considering that are dropping pretty fast. One more graph from the 2020 report I wanted to show you. This is our current condition in terms of what portion of our street inventory is at the various levels. So currently, right now, we've got 56% at very good, 32 at good, which is nice. We have almost 90% of our streets either at good or very good condition. So that's, better than a lot of cities. Grateful for that. We do have this 11% that is in this poor category. It counts for our $16 million worth of backlog that we're not going to get to. Under our existing S1 scenario, we project to be here in 2030, the second bar, where 88% of our streets are very good, over 90 at good or very good, and then we've got about 9.5% in the poor or very poor category. That's the $28 million that we price tag that we look at in 2030 to bring all of these, the yellow and the red and the blue, up to the green level. The S2 is, again, meeting all the street needs now at the optimal time. We'd address them all, theoretically right away, and then continue to maintain them with less expensive means slurry seal over the years to keep them in that condition. And then S3, addressing every street in the next 10 years, gets us to, again, over 99% of our streets in the very good condition. So that's just graphically what each of those scenarios would do. This slide I pulled from actually a city in Colorado that had done a presentation on this. And I wanted to just illustrate, contrast a little bit what we've done, what we're trying to get to. The red line is kind of the degradation curve that we've talked about before. As the years go on, our pavement condition drops. We've kind of waited until way out in the pavement lifetime, 25 years in this case, in this example, and then invested a lot of money to get a vertical rise on the graph and get our PCI index back high again. That takes a lot of good fortune to have the kind of money to do that on a citywide basis. We also, once we pass this certain point, say 25, we have these streets that languish, really doing nothing, and just get worse and worse. They're just bad. You can't really tell in your car between 25 and 22. It's just bad. You just know it's bad. What we'd like to do is get to a curve, a maintenance cycle that looks like this green line, where as things degrade, this is on a 7.5 or 8 year cycle. We pump a little money into slurry seal, and then it degrades again back to that level. We pump some more money. Maybe every couple of cycles we do a minor rehab, which would be maybe an inch overlay, inch and a half overlay, and then it continues. So what this does is it reduces once we invest the money to get our streets all in good shape, then we're in a process where we're spending money every year, being very deliberate about slurry and other things, occasionally minor rehab, but we are spending less money and we're spending predictable money. So that helps us with our asset management. So that's kind of what we're going for, is this eventually to get to this kind of green sawtooth type curve in our maintenance approach for pavement. Okay, back to one more thing, and this is hard to see, I realize that, but it illustrates a point. These are all curves, degradation curves, for various environmental conditions that we might come across. Thin pavements, high traffic versus low traffic, weak subgrade versus strong subgrade. So it just shows that, for instance, if you wanted to compare what does the subgrade have to do with anything, well, you could compare, you could hold the other two variables the same, look at weak subgrade versus strong subgrade. You find out that if you have strong subgrade, your attenuation curve is a lot longer. Your pavement lasts longer because the subgrade is good. So that informs us that if we have places where we know the subgrade is bad, it's worth the money to invest in redoing the subgrade rather than just putting a Band-Aid over the top of it. Again, high traffic versus low traffic. The high traffic areas degrade on a steeper curve than the low traffic areas. And so maybe it makes sense to prioritize some of those high use, high traffic areas, collectors versus residential streets, for instance, to be able to address those while their PCI is still relatively high and the cost per square foot to maintain them or rehabilitate them is lower than it might be for a similar type of street with a different use, with a low use. Again, thick pavement, thin pavement. Again, if 2 inches is good, is 3 inches better? Well, if you study these curves, you find out that 3 inches isn't necessarily that much better, bang for buck wise. Although if the incremental cost is small, maybe you do it anyway. So those are just some of the things to think about when we talk about how to feed our inputs into our decision about how to prioritize our deferred maintenance program. Okay, so I just listed here some, I call them goals and considerations. I think there's probably a lot of words you could use. People have a lot of ideas about how to prioritize this, but if we go strictly on economics and we try to capitalize, make our money go the furthest, no matter if that means that we're doing obscure streets before we're doing heavily used streets, or we're doing all streets in District X, but we're neglecting District Y. That's something we should talk about. Should that be a goal? Shared opportunities there. For instance, the Kingsdale, the Transit Center project has some money available from Metro and federal sources for the bus improvements. We're going to sneak in some pavement improvements there too because it's part of the project. And so we're looking for these leveraging opportunities to kind of find extra money to do some of these things. Functionality, should we address worst first? Should we go to the PCIs with the 25 before we go to the 40s, even if the PCIs are all in the same neighborhood or they're don't get that much traffic? Worst first kind of makes sense to everybody. That's kind of the knee-jerk reaction you have when you ask the question, how should we do this? But that's not necessarily meets the city's goals for that green curve that I was talking about earlier. Feasibility, what can we afford to do? What's financially possible for the city to do? We've only recently, well, since I've been here, I guess that's not that long, but bonding for, the city council just approved bond measure for pension liability. Is bonding something we would want to consider to move all the streets into a really high category and pay for them when interest rates are cheap and get it done, and be able to get on that green sawtooth curve sooner than later? I don't know. Parity, how important is that? We certainly need to be able to defend a goal, from a political point of view, from a resident perspective point of view. So something else to think about. From a staff point of view, my point of view, which is not all that experienced, we're still trying to get help from consultants on this as well, but it seems to me that you try and do your least expensive projects first, because you cover a lot of ground. Literally, you cover a lot of pavement. You get improvements in a lot of neighborhoods. You get a lot of residents impacted by that, and the sooner you can do things before pavement degrades for any given street, the less expensive it's going to be in general. It also seems to make sense to me to look at the fastest degradation curves, the steepest curves, and say maybe, all other things being equal, maybe we look at those first. High use streets maybe should be considered first, because waiting 5 years for a residential street may not change your costs that much, whereas waiting 5 years on a collector road or an arterial may increase your costs considerably. Doing the most impacting soonest. If we've got a particular area that's going to make, it's outside of a school or some high use area that really needs to be addressed for, not just the motoring public, but for cyclists and for, other people using the roadway, maybe that makes the most sense. So things to consider in our prioritization. And then certainly we want to be able to do something that our council members and our city management can explain, can understand. So it doesn't feel like a black box that nobody can quite figure out. So these are all things that we're thinking about. I mean, we have some ideas, like for instance, right now, if I were to have to, make a decision today, I would look at Grant Avenue, which is right now, it's got PCIs in the 50s. In the 2030 timeframe, its PCIs below 25 for most of the blocks. It's a heavily used street. It's got a bike facility on it. We happen to be doing some other work on that soon, some concrete work, so it's going to be less expensive per mile to do Grant because we're paying for the concrete work another way right now. So, to me, that would make sense in this particular case. But I know we're looking for something maybe more general. I'm certainly looking for something more general as a way to prioritize this moving forward. What does the community want? What does the city council want? I'm grateful to be able to have this problem. It's a great new program. Grateful they found some money for it. I think it will help us in the long run to reach our PCI goals sooner than later. But would love to get your input, and not just about the topic, but how to gather more data. How should staff go about getting the public input? Or is this something maybe more technical than people want to deal with, and it's not worth those kind of meetings? So I'm just looking for help here on direction and input as we move forward with this brand new project. So recommendation, pretty simple again on this one, just receive and file and provide input about how to move forward to build this program in a way that meets the goals and expectations of the city and the city leadership in the city of Redondo Beach. So thanks. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Andy. It's very clear and we get it. I'm going to hand the floor over to Commissioner Min now for any comments and input.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is a topic I live and breathe every day, asset management and pavement management. That's literally my job for a very large city here in the county. And I feel your pain very viscerally. There's never enough money to get the payment to where we want to get it. There just isn't. And there's politics and there's all kinds of issues, right? No, I looked at my street. I looked at the report from September 2020. Looked at the streets near my neighborhood, and it's pretty accurate. You know, on Phelan Avenue, it's currently a 39 PCI, which is about right. It's literally crumbling, and 2030 it'll be a PCI of 9, which is basically no street left. You know, the same pothole has been filled like every maybe 6 months. A crew comes out and fills it because probably someone complained, and it's right where the tire hits. So you feel that pothole every single day, right? So I don't know if I have a really good answer for you, because I wish I had some answers too for my agency. But you know, one thing I am considering, and what I'll share, is look for different kinds of treatments other than slurry and overlay that could help stretch that dollar. You know, one thing I'm looking into very much is cape sealing. That's something the county uses pretty regularly, especially on their thinner streets where there's not a lot of options for. Either you got to cape seal it or you got to reconstruct it. They don't have much choice because the asphalt's only like 3 inches or 4 inches thick or something. So that's one treatment I would highly suggest you guys look into. I'm actually piloting that in my current job, and could help stretch the dollars and get a lot more lane miles for the dollar. And you know, one way to prioritize would simply be a community process. I mean, there's a council process, but the communities know where the problems keep coming up. Like we know, like I just mentioned, I see the same pothole coming up every single time, every 6 months. And when it rains, it's even faster. You know, maybe every 2-3 months, a crew comes out and they fill it up, and it, you know, somehow like the asphalt comes out and they have to fill it up again and then again and again. So you may not be able to hit every expensive street. You can hit some of the cheaper streets, but there's going to be a few streets where everyone kind of agrees, like, we got to do this, right? And so, you know, one way you could do this is simply by having them submit comments to you through some email or electronic method, or come to the Public Works Commission and send it through us. And I don't know if you have a GIS map uploaded somewhere where people could just submit a comment to or whatever. That could be one way. So those are my 2 suggestions coming from literally from your standpoint on my side. Look for other treatments to stretch the dollar. And the third one, I'm glad you mentioned grants. That's my other hat that I wear. That's with the federal bill coming down from Washington, potentially in like $1.3 trillion, I'm hearing. That could be a major boon for all these cities who need this money just to rehab our streets, right? So lobbying the congressional members, senators, working with CTC and Caltrans, you know, whoever you need to work with, Metro, also to just try to advocate for those funds is, I think, going to be a major win for all of us down here in Southern California. So, you know, in my other world, I'll advocate for us as well here in Redondo, because it's all kind of the same group of people that we all, you know, work together with. So
Right.
I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Commissioner Min. All good comments, and I appreciate your insight and your perspective from where you're coming from. I see Commissioner Hannon's hand up, so I'll hand the floor over to you, sir.
Again, I think Dan was for next, but I'll take his spot. What the heck? But Andy, I thought you did a great job explaining this, and you know, I'll tell you, I took the time to read that document today, and I was so impressed with the pavement management program. It's such a wonderful analytical tool. It's an excellent way to inventory the city streets, to plan, to prioritize work, to make decisions and save the city money. I mean, you know, there's still decisions that have to be made even with this tool, but I like the way it gives you information, it gives you data so you can make better decisions. Very impressed with it. But, you know, as we know, you mentioned this during your presentation, and we all know that reslurring the roadways, it offers a unique opportunity to also make our streets safer for pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorists at a lower cost, because we can integrate these things into the repavement process. whether they're adding, lane edge lines, crosswalks, bike lanes, whatever it is. But another opportunity too, and I think you alluded to this also, is the fact that there's not always grant money available for resealing city roadways, but right now there seems to be a lot of funding opportunities for bicycle, pedestrian, safety improvements, and which often turns out to be no more than paint, but it's out there, and so that could offset the cost of some of the things you're doing, which I know you thought of. So, but I had to probably repeat what you're thinking. So, anyway, good job, Andy. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
All right, Jim. Thank you, Commissioner Garcia.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to echo Commissioner Hannon's comments about a very good job on this presentation, because I actually feel privileged that we can even have this presentation, because I don't know if you know about my background, but in the last decade or more, I've been working for some of the most challenging cities in this area, and we get to a pavement management plan and we start doing improvements based on that pavement management system. But most of the time in the cities I work for, we never get to discussions about economics or how to best maximize your dollar with and longevity with pavement. That I love this conversation, but yeah, the cities I work for, yeah, it's always politics, and you're basically designing streets from the top in most of these cities, and yeah, it's so refreshing to be here in Redondo Beach and hearing this presentation, because yeah, I'm all 100% behind you, Andy, and yeah, keep up the good work.
All right, very good. Well, and I appreciate the presentation like everyone else. I really think it's quite clear and concise. We kind of understand, the lifespan of asphalt and how the streets degrade continually. There was one slide, though. I just had a question of you, Andy. There was a slide that had basically 4 conditions, and one of them was labeled S1, and it had to do with how we get our good and very good up to 90%, but then we see for the first time bad get up to about 10%. And so, understanding that, I think you're spot on in terms of how to prioritize. How do you kind of address what you also listed as parity and or the political impacts? I mean, how do you decide which of those streets are going to be part of the 10% that actually degrade? I mean, a thought that crossed my mind that, it obviously would be pretty challenging for it to be a residential street because of the impacts the quality of the street might even have on the value of the homes on that particular street. So is there something that prioritizes like Santa Fe or Redondo Avenue North, one of the more industrial streets? Granted, those get probably beat up more because of the truck traffic and all. But anyway, my question was really more about how do you prioritize who gets to the bottom? Is there a way to defend that by a simple statement?
Well, fortunately, the software does a lot of the heavy lifting for us on that. The software will generate a 10-year model or a 20-year model about which streets to do first in the most effective way. So our problem is that we have more streets suggested than we have money available. And so we're just selecting between the streets we could touch to get, so for instance, the slide with the 10% or so that's in the very poor condition, those streets are in no scenario going to be touched with residential rehab money or slurry seal money. We might consider doing something with deferred maintenance money, because that's what those streets would be categorized as. But so we have a long list of streets in each of the districts that all fall into this category of streets we could touch to improve, to meet the council stated goal of bring the PCI to 75. What we do is we try and consider some of our history where we did kind of a geographic approach. So the council was interested in, favoring those districts that had the longest gap since they were last addressed. We also, the council also heard that if you invest $6 a square yard or square foot, whatever it was, into slurry, and you can cover 100,000 square feet and keep the future costs down, because you're bringing a street at a 78 back up to 99 and keep it on that kind of that green sawtooth curve versus the red line that went down deeper, then that was smart. So we ended up doing a number of streets in slurry in the District 1, which we had just, that was our most recent residential rehab section. So they heard that too. We try and do streets that are contiguous, so we get some economies of scale from our contractors, so they're not picking up and moving all over town to do a block here and a block there, but we're trying to do bigger patches of, several block runs on a lot of our streets. There's some horse trading that goes on at the council level. Honestly, one year council allocated themselves each $80,000 to put towards the street program at their own choosing within their own district. So we went with the overall program, and then they had kind of their discretionary money to address the streets that were getting the most public attention that they wanted to address. So, the software we use, it's called Street Saver. It's very common. We've moved over from actually a little bit more arcane product in 2017. We're a little more mainstream now in our use of that. It kind of identifies, here's 15 streets. If you can only do 5, here's 15. So you pick from the 15 to get to the 5, but they pick from the 100 to get down to the 15. So the last little bit is really more the polishing of the list, if you will, versus the construction of the list.
I totally get that. And, like you said, the software does the heavy lifting, but it's interesting that you get it down to the 10% or the 15%, whatever the smaller bite seems to be. It's the one, though, that's going to bring the residents out of the woodwork if it's their street that's getting neglected. And so, you've quieted the bulk of the citizenry, which is already quiet a bit anyway. And it's just, I'm just trying to prepare who's going to come out of the woodworks,
To give our council a lot of credit, they understand this, the science behind this. They understand the degradation curve. They understand putting money into slurry where they hadn't for a number of years. But they also understand that they've got, political pressures on them as well. So they've come up with this hybrid so far. We selected this last time. Historically, every year we do a project. And so we've been bringing the list of street question to the council every year. This last year, we finally got a little smarter and said, well, the PMS gets done every 3 years. Let's get a 3-year project list so we don't have to go back to them every year for that. And so we've identified already for 21, 22, and 23 which streets will get residential, the grind and overlay, and which streets will get the slurry. And then when we get done with that, we will have a new PMS that will inform the next 3-year window on those particular programs. So, but this deferred maintenance one is a little different because we're not necessarily have the same goals. We're trying to avoid $28.5 million in 2030, which is a different beast than having, parity and generally all our roads up in the 70s. So, and it's great, to somebody's point there, it's great to be having this discussion. There's a lot worse discussions you could be having about managing your pavement. So.
Very good. Here. I do see Commissioner Min's hand up. Did you have a final comment or inquiry?
Yeah, thank you. It just occurred to me. It's getting a little late. I'm not thinking straight anymore. But do you guys charge utilities for cutting up the street? Because that's something that we do. That's how I generate some revenue. You cut the street, you're damaging the street, so therefore you got to pay some fees to help us restore the street, right? And you know, I live near Ripley, and they've torn up that street like crazy. There's metal panels all over the place. I don't know what utility is going in there right now. I mean, they should be responsible for rebuilding that street for us. So kind of offsetting some of those costs to the private sector. Has that been considered by the council at all ever?
Not in my time here, which is just coming up on 5 years. Ted may have more experience with that than I do. We do have moratoriums on our streets where we don't necessarily collect a fee, but we, on those streets, will ask the contractor to repair the street, you know, curb to curb, block to block, intersection to intersection or something. He's on a moratorium street. Ted, do we have any history here of collecting fees, or have you done that anywhere?
I don't have the history here in Redondo Beach. I do remember at the city of Torrance, we tried to do that. It was a trench cut ordinance. And the utility companies really came out of the woodworks and opted to it. They saw that as an extra tax, if you will, or fee for them to have to repave roadways in lieu of the damages that they conduct when they do their potholing. I know what we have here, rather than a fee, is that we have their pavement restoration requirements. So rather than just putting in a standard trench replacement, we have a T-cut for the locations. So if they're putting in a trench, it's not going to be just along the socket lines that they went in and trenched work. They will have to do an expansion. I think it's about a foot on either side of the trench itself to make sure that we don't see any reflective cracking that occurs. As Andy mentioned, we do have the moratorium on newly paved streets. So if they do have an emergency or some other work that's occurring, we do have requirements for them to repave that section of the street, but not on standard pothole or trench, trench lines that are going in. I believe the work that you mentioned, Andy, remind me, I think it's either gas company or water. I believe it's water that's on
Ripley.
On Ripley, yeah. For that, they will have extensive
sanitation districts up there somewhere, but yeah, I'm not sure.
They will have extensive pavement repair, but normally speaking, it doesn't go beyond a T-cut or trench restoration rather than a half street. And I don't remember, the legal ramblings. I don't know if in the city of Los Angeles you have a trench cut, ordinance or some other means of collecting those additional fees. I think for us, our nominal fees are whatever is our permit application and not something more than that.
We also have franchise fees for the gas company, for instance. They pay us not based on cutting, but a fee based on their volume, their dollar volume, right. Which covers, I would assume, in their minds at least, covers some of those costs to the city. Cal Water predates the city here, so their legal position is they don't owe us a franchise. Of course, Edison is, they're aerial primarily, and they're under a different set of rules than pipelines are. So,
okay, yeah, definitely. There's utilities will bring out the lobbyists and everything to try to fight you on those things. We had to do an academic study commission from a university, outside the state to essentially justify exactly what you've already shown us tonight, right? And then, of course, that was not well taken by the utility companies, but it was just a reality. There was no other choice. So we got through, and there is a restoration fee for helping us do our pavement program. So I don't know, Redondo's politics is going to withstand a lobbyist attack from the utility companies or whatever, but there's different strategies for levying fees on these utilities that could help with this whole financial issue, because we just need more money. That's the short and skinny of it. We need more money, and in a sustainable way, right? Because in 10 years we're going to be in the exact same spot we are today about the 10-year program that we just finished. So
I think the goal is to try and get to a spot where we still will always have maintenance, but it will be, we're kind of in a recovery period right now for a great recession impacted us, and then just maybe a strategy that wasn't the most economically efficient, I'll say it that way. That was our procedure before. So, my hope is that at the end of this 10-year period, we'll be dealing with mostly slurry programs, which are, of course, a lot cheaper and frankly, a lot easier on the public than our grind and overlay programs are. So that's where we hope to get. And honestly, the difference between touching every street, was somewhere, we're at 4.6 million a year. I think it was about 7.2, which is a big number when you're coming to, general funds for our city, but it's not an insurmountable number if we wanted to really focus on it. So, I think our council is always seems like they're very willing to put more money into the residential streets. So, when they have money available at midterm or mid-year, whatever. So, I think we have a lot of people, pointed in the same direction on this, and it's really just a matter of trying to accommodate, public perception and desire, and the poor guy who's come to the meeting every time and said, "I've got the worst street in the city, and when are you going to do it?" And there are a few who honestly do have the worst street in the city, and when are we going to redo it? That's a good question. So, just looking for direction and coaching. I appreciate the new technologies comment. I may call you offline just to see who you know and what you've heard and what you've read. Give us a start on that.
Yeah, feel free. Love to share with you my experiences and what I'm working on now.
Yeah,
I think I might be.
Thank you.
All right, all good stuff. Good. As I look around, I'm not seeing any other hands up. And so obviously we are now at this point looking for a motion to receive and file a report as presented with any additional aspects to that motion that will guide staff a little further. So
I'll receive and file if you like.
And just for the record, there are no public comments for this item.
Thank you for chiming in. That was always appreciate that reminder that we're good. Commissioner Min, I started to hear you with a motion.
Sure, I'll make the motion to receive and file.
Yeah, I'll second it.
Okay, we have a second from Commissioner Garcia. Do we have any other discussion or input? All right, then I will ask Jean to take the roll call vote, please.
The roll call vote is as follows. Commissioner Glass?
Yes.
Commissioner Hannon?
Approve.
Commissioner Garcia?
Yes.
Commissioner Min?
Yes.
Commissioner Bajaj?
I did see that we lost Commissioner Bajaj about 10 minutes ago. Perhaps I got a little flash that said he was leaving the meeting.
Vice Chair Simpson?
Yes.
And Chair Funabashi?
Yes. Okay, very good. We're at the end of our meeting with our favorite last part, and that is our member items or referrals to staff. And I'll just go in order. We'll go straight through the line. I'll start with you, Commissioner Glass. Do you have any referrals to staff?
Surprise, none tonight.
Okay. Commissioner Garcia.
Just keep up the good work. That's all I have.
Here. Commissioner Hannon.
I agree with that, Dan. Keep up the good work. It's a good meeting. Thank you.
We're on a roll now. Vice Chair Simpson.
Yeah, just a couple of things. A couple of traffic lights on Artesia at Renge and Green, which have a protected arrow and then an unprotected arrow green that goes to that. And I think there have been a number of crashes at both of those intersections, and it might be prudent to look into changing those signals so that they only allowed left turns on a protected arrow, and otherwise, and not allow it when the light goes green. I'm not sure I have the technical term right for that, but usually you start off with a left only, and then it goes away, and then you get a general green light, and you can still make a left turn. And that's where there tends to be some crashes. So if you only had a protected left turn, that might be the way to go. And those two intersections, I think, would be worth looking at for that problem. Been a couple of bad accidents lately, I think, up on Range.
Okay. I think that's pretty clear. Do they call that protected left turn versus permissive left turn? Something to that effect. But
I think that's the technology, yeah.
I think they're clear on that. And Range, yeah, that's the...
Ranging green.
Okay, on Artesia, definitely. Anything else?
Nope.
Okay, then last but not least, Commissioner Min, any referrals to staff?
No referrals. Just keep it up like everyone else. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, seeing no other business before us, then I'll entertain a motion in a moment to adjourn to our next meeting, which you'll see will be held at 7 p.m. on August 23rd, 2021. So it looks like we get the month of July off. So I'll wish all of you a great July. I'm sure I'll see some of you out in the community. And with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Chairperson Funabashi, before we do adjourn, I do
yes,
want to say that in the motion of the City Council during their budget, they have allocated monies for the Public Works Commission to return to a monthly meeting. So as soon as we get the clarity on that, we will make you aware and we'll update the scheduling of the meetings.
Okay. Does it still seem, though, that our next meeting will be in August, that we will not be meeting in July, though?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And
quick question, will the next meeting be Zoom or will it be in person, or do we know yet?
That's a good question.
It's a good question.
It'd be great to see all of you again in our new home. I can't wait to see our new home. It's going to be awesome.
You know, I would speculate that it may be in person because we are scheduled, hopefully, to go to the City Council chamber and have the first City Council meeting on July the 20th in the chamber. So we're crossing our fingers. We'll be back in person.
All right, let's get that air conditioning fired up because it's going to be a hot summer. Okay, any other questions? Otherwise, I'll ask for the motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, Vice Chair Simpson, do I have a second?
I'll second it and see everybody in August.
All right, second by Commissioner Hannon. All in favor, say aye.
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 Are there any who are opposed? Very good, then we are adjourned. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.